Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. You're not just drifting off to the sounds of history, you're stepping into it. It's May 1945 and you're a German soldier. The war is over, and while that might sound like good news, brace yourself. You probably won't survive this. At least not in the way you think. You're about to find out what happens after the final gunshot, when the world has stopped exploding, but your life is still a slow-motion collapse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I know algorithms are the least of your worries in 1945, but future you will thank you. Let me know your city and the time where you're watching from, because I'm betting it's late, and we're in this quiet hour together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the remains of what used to be a town, boots sinking into broken brick and ash, rifle dangling uselessly from your shoulder. All across Germany, silence is falling, thick, stunned, almost reverent. May 8th, 1945. The Reich has surrendered, the war is over, but for you, it's the beginning of something stranger. You've survived 6 years of bullets, bombs, starvation, and trench rot. And now you don't know what to do with your hands, or your uniform, or your future. High above, Allied planes no longer circle like vultures. Instead, they vanish into the haze like ghosts with better places to be. Berlin is in ruins, the countryside is hollowed out, and you, well, you're just kind of standing there. No orders, no Führer. Just a sick feeling in your gut like you've been unplugged from something monstrous, and now your nervous system is catching up. You hear it before you see it. A deep American engine growling over the hills, then the clatter of boots, not German ones, and a line of olive-drab uniforms fans out over the crest. Hands go up around you, some automatically, others defiantly slow. You raise yours too, heart thumping with a kind of anticlimax. No last stand, no noble fade to black, just the end, sneaking in quietly like a cough during Sunday service. And just like that, you're a prisoner. All around Europe, it's the same story. From Norway's fjords to the sands of North Africa, millions of German soldiers are suddenly no longer soldiers. The surrender has been total, the defeat complete. But the world doesn't have a rule book for what to do with this many POWs. You're one of over 11 million in uniform when the curtain falls. And nobody, least of all your captors, is ready for the logistical nightmare that's about to unfold. The American GIs seem more amused than angry. They're young, sunburnt, chewing gum and calling each other Mac. Some of them look barely old enough to shave. They bark a few English words at you, basic stuff like hands up, move, and no funny business. A few speak German, clipped and cautious, but mostly you just follow the guy in front of you. That's been the safest bet for 6 years anyway. You're marched into an open field already crowded with captured troops. There's no fencing yet, just a loose circle of tanks and machine guns. You're told this is temporary, a holding zone, but night falls, and you're still there. The next night too. There are no tents, no latrines, just mud, cold wind, and too many bodies breathing too close together. You curl up using your helmet as a pillow and try to sleep while someone 2 feet away dreams of gunfire and mutters names you don't recognize. Somewhere nearby, a field radio crackles with the announcement, Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. In London, there are fireworks. In New York, confetti. In Moscow, vodka-soaked parades. But here, in this nameless field, it just means your war is officially over and your future has been pushed into a weird, indefinite pause. One guy in your unit, Müller, breaks the silence on day 3. So what now, he asks to no one in particular. Someone jokes about escaping and making a run for Switzerland. Someone else suggests shaving and pretending to be Dutch. No one laughs very hard. You all know this is going to get worse before it gets better. That night the camp grows. More prisoners arrive, thousands of them. Some in tattered Wehrmacht grey, others in the black uniforms of the SS, and the Americans. They're clearly overwhelmed. Rations are thin, water is muddy. There's no sanitation system unless you count the ditch along the east fence, and rain turns everything into soup. Your clothes, your food, your hope. Some start trading stories to pass the time. One guy claims he saw Hitler's body in the bunker. Another insists the Führer escaped and is living in a farmhouse near Hamburg. No one really knows. But the rumours are comforting in a strange way, like bedtime stories for grown men who just spent 6 years learning how not to die. Historically speaking, this limbo you're in will become infamous. The Allies call them Rheinwiesenlager, the Rhine Meadow camps. Temporary enclosures for German POWs, mostly in Western Germany. At their peak, these camps will hold over 1 million men. Some will stay for weeks, others months. And there's debate even today about how many died there. Starvation, exposure, untreated wounds. Allied sources downplay it. German records suggest worse. The truth, as usual, is lost somewhere in the middle. But let's talk about something weird for a second. Despite the misery, not everyone in these camps hates it. That's right. For some, this is the least stressful part of the war. No shooting, no marching, no icy Russian winter trying to chew off your toes. You don't have to think for yourself. You just wait. And if you're lucky, maybe someone hands you a can of beans every other day. Then there's the guy who walks around quoting Goethe to the guards, hoping it'll get him better treatment. Another guy tries to trade his Iron Cross for a cigarette. Everyone's got an angle now. You're not soldiers anymore, you're survivors. And that's a whole different game. As the days blur into weeks, the Americans start dividing prisoners by category. High-ranking officers are pulled out for interrogation. SS members are marked with special tags. The rest of you, just regular grunts, are considered low priority. You hear whispers of repatriation, of transfers to labour camps, of being sent to France, or Britain, or even the Soviet zone. And that, my friend, is where things will really start to splinter. You're not sure how long it's been now. Days, maybe weeks. Time has stopped following the rules. There's no sunrise to mark the beginning, no dinner bell to break the monotony. Just grey light, grey skies, grey thoughts. You've gone from soldier to statistic, a nameless shape in a sea of damp wool and aching joints. When the guards call for movement, you go. When they bark for silence, you oblige. It's not discipline anymore, it's survival instinct. Reflex honed by years of doing whatever kept you alive a little longer. Eventually your group is pulled from the open-air camp and herded toward trucks. The rumour mill ignites. Maybe you're going home. Maybe it's France. Maybe it's a grave. No one says it out loud, but the fear is thick in the air as the canvas-flap trucks roar to life. You're packed in so tight you can feel the heartbeat of the man next to you pounding against your elbow. And for hours, possibly days, you jostle down cracked roads, past shattered towns, through fields where nothing grows. When the trucks finally stop, it's not what you expected. You're in another camp, but this one is organised. Rows of barbed wire, tents with American markings, wooden watchtowers. The sign reads, Camp Lucky Strike. You half laugh when you see it. Some dark joke named after the cigarettes you've seen American soldiers smoke like candy. A few of them even hand out packs, one per prisoner, as you shuffle into the compound. It feels like a bribe. You take it anyway. This camp sits in northern France, one of several cigarette camps the US military established as staging grounds, some for troops going home, others for prisoners like you. Lucky Strike is massive, sprawling across hills and scrubland, once filled with GIs awaiting their ticket back to America. Now it holds Germans waiting for whatever comes next. You're assigned a tent with 8 others. It leaks when it rains and smells faintly of wet canvas and sweat, but it's luxury compared to the mud pit you left behind. There's even hot soup once a day. Thin, yes, but hot. You sit in silence slurping it, grateful not to be chewing on mouldy crusts. For the first time in months you start to sleep through the night, even if the dreams still wake you sweating and tangled in your blanket. One morning a sergeant with a clipboard calls out names. Yours is on the list. Your heart stutters. Is this it? Are you being sent home? Shot? Promoted to head cabbage peeler in some distant kitchen? Turns out it's none of the above. You're being processed, photographed, questioned and labelled. You're asked about your unit, your rank, where you served. They're looking for something, you can tell. Evidence, guilt, patterns. You're careful with your answers, not dishonest exactly, just strategic. Some guys slip up. A fellow in your tent admits he served in the SS. 2 days later, he's gone. Pulled from the camp at night, no goodbyes. The rest of you pretend not to notice. In Lucky Strike, blending in is the safest form of camouflage. The weirdest part? Some Americans seem genuinely curious about you. Not hostile, just baffled. A guard named Thompson asks why you fought. You shrug and say it wasn't like you had a choice. He nods like he understands, but the silence afterwards stretches a little too long. There's an undercurrent running through the camp, an awkward dance between captors and captives. The Americans don't treat you cruelly. not like the Soviets would, but they don't quite treat you like people either. You're prisoners of war, and this is still war even if the shooting has stopped. You find this in the little things: food arriving late, medical treatment being rationed, long days without being spoken to unless barked at. But there are strange exceptions. One night someone sets up a projector and plays a film. You all sit in rows on the dirt, watching flickering images of a world you barely recognise. It's a documentary. Grainy footage of concentration camps, bulldozers pushing bodies into mass graves, starved survivors staring into the camera like ghosts. The Americans want you to see what the regime you fought for really did. You don't know how to react. No one talks during the film. Afterward, a few men mutter that it's propaganda, staged by the Allies. But most of you just go to bed in silence, heads full of something heavier than exhaustion. You're not just prisoners now, you're witnesses, and whether you want to or not, you've started to understand what that means. Historically, this part of the war, the re-education phase, is something scholars still debate. Were these showings meant to break you, to reform you, or to prepare you for reintegration into a post-Nazi world? No one really agrees, but you remember that night vividly, and so do others. Something changes in the air after that. You notice fewer jokes, fewer arguments, just quiet processing. Still, life in Lucky Strike isn't all grim. There's a guy named Schneider who makes puppets out of scraps and performs absurd little shows for your tent group. Another guy somehow gets hold of a harmonica and plays every night until lights out. It's bad music, but it's human. That matters more than the notes. One afternoon you help unload boxes for the kitchen and manage to snag a half-broken radio. You and your buddies huddle around it later, tuning through French music, BBC broadcasts static. Eventually a crackling voice announces something in German, something about rebuilding, about trials in Nuremberg, about a world waking up from a nightmare. You don't catch every word, but the meaning drips through. What's odd is how your identity starts to blur. You were a soldier. You fought in battles that scorched half of Europe. You watched friends bleed out in snowbanks. But now you're someone else. You're a man in borrowed clothes, eating borrowed food, waiting for borrowed time to decide what becomes of you. At night you lie on your cot, watching moonlight crawl up the canvas ceiling, and wonder what's left waiting outside these fences. Is your family still alive? Is your home still standing? Will anyone care that you survived? Some of the men talk about escape, but it's mostly theatre. No one actually wants to run. Where would you go? There are no trains, no safe havens. You're stuck not just in a camp, but in a moment in history, like a bug pinned under glass. And then finally they say the magic words. Transfer. You're moving again, not home, not yet, but onward, to somewhere else, somewhere new. You don't even ask questions anymore. You just pack up your memories and your silent regrets and fall into line. The trucks come at dawn, engines coughing in the fog like they've caught whatever sickness you've all been passing back and forth for weeks. You clamber in, the metal cold against your palms, the wooden floor slick with dew. No one speaks much. At this point it's not fear, it's routine. Movement means change, and change is a gamble. Maybe you're headed to a better camp. Maybe it's worse. Maybe it's not a camp at all. You gave up guessing 3 transfers ago. The convoy rumbles along crumbling roads, winding past scorched villages and farmhouses with gaping holes where windows used to be. Children sometimes run alongside the trucks, waving, their faces thin but curious. You wave back once, then stop. It doesn't feel right. After several hours, the trucks slow, grind into gear, and stop beside a muddy rail line. And there, waiting like a bad omen, is a Soviet soldier. You know it before you're told. This is a handoff. The Americans are done with you. You've just been traded. The Soviet guards don't shout when you disembark. They don't need to. Their faces do the talking, tight, unreadable. You've seen that look before, on the Eastern Front. It's the look of someone who saw too much, lost too much, and came back colder than steel. There's a new kind of silence now. Not the numb silence of the Rhine camps or Lucky Strike, but something heavier. You can feel it in your lungs as you're herded onto a different set of trucks. These ones older, rougher, with canvas that barely keeps out the rain. The Soviets don't bother explaining where you're going. Not in Russian, not in German. You just go. Eventually you cross into Soviet-occupied territory. The landscape shifts subtly. Villages look more abandoned. People, when you see them, turn their eyes away. You realise they don't see soldiers anymore. They see ghosts or invaders. And they're not wrong. You're taken to a transit camp. Not a prison exactly, but close. Barbed wire, barking dogs, guards with greasy rifles slung over one shoulder, and a cigarette tucked behind the ear. No humour here. No lucky strikes. This place has a name, but it doesn't matter. What matters is what comes next. Labour selection. The process is brutally efficient. You're stripped, examined like livestock. A doctor with shaking hands taps your chest, checks your teeth, scribbles notes. Fit? You go one way. Limping? The other. Old? Forget it. You hear one guy speak out of turn asking where he's being sent. A Soviet guard cracks him across the mouth with the butt of his rifle. That's your welcome. You're marked for labour. Of course you are. You're healthy, 28, no visible wounds, and worst of all, no useful profession. You're not an engineer or a translator or even a cook. You're a body, and bodies are for breaking. You're not told where you're going, but a few of the older men whisper about it. Mines, factories, Siberia. That word, Siberia, hangs over you like a curse. You've heard stories, even before the war. Endless forests, temperatures that peel skin, camps where the snow piles higher than the fences and guards disappear into it like ghosts. The train they load you into has no seats, no windows, just straw on the floor and a rusted bucket in the corner. You share it with 40 other men. There's no room to lie down, so you take turns. After the first 2 days, you stop noticing the stink. After the third, the hunger. You chew buttons, leather. Someone has a deck of cards and you all play by candle stub until the wax gives out. It helps, a little. When the train finally screeches to a halt, it's dark and it's cold. Not European cold. Not Berlin in January cold. This is another planet kind of cold. Your breath hangs in the air like smoke. Your eyebrows start to freeze together. You step off the train and realise you've made it. Welcome to Siberia. You're issued new clothes. Not warm ones, just different. A quilted jacket, stiff pants, a hat that might have once belonged to someone else. Probably did. You're marched to a camp built out of logs and ice. Guard towers loom. The fences sparkle with frost. And there, behind one of the barracks, is a frozen lake with holes cut for washing and water. You're told not to fall in. No one survives the lake. The next morning, the real work begins. You're assigned to a mine. Coal. Deep underground, pitch black. Air so thick you cough blood by the end of the first week. The food is barely edible. Boiled grain, thin soup, sometimes a shard of beet if you're lucky. The guards don't speak. They just point and glare. A few prisoners try to talk back. You don't see them again. Oddly enough, you start to adapt. Your body numbs to the pain. Your hands get used to bleeding. You and your crew develop a rhythm. Dig, lift, haul, sleep, repeat. You don't talk much anymore. There's no time, and the cold has taken your voice anyway. Here's a quirky little fact you'd never guess. In one of these Soviet labour camps, someone managed to build a violin out of wood scraps, wires, melted rubber. They played it once just before being transferred to a steel plant in Irkutsk. The guards listened, then destroyed it. But the memory stuck. You hear about it from a man who swears he was there, his eyes glinting in the firelight like someone remembering a miracle. Meanwhile, your brain starts to play tricks on you. You dream in German, but the voices speak Russian. Sometimes you think you see your mother's face in the frost on the window. You stop counting days. Years start to feel like rumours. Scholars still argue today about how many German soldiers ended up in Soviet labour camps. Some say 2.5 million. Others think more. How many died? No one agrees. Somewhere between 400,000 and a million, depending on who's doing the math. The Soviets didn't exactly keep cheerful holiday newsletters on the topic. And then one day, just like that, it ends. You don't know why. Maybe your sentence is up. Maybe the Soviets need space. Maybe the Cold War is heating up, and you're suddenly a pawn again, but this time in a different game. Whatever the reason, you're called in, handed a paper, and told to prepare to leave. No thank yous, no apologies. Just go. You don't remember the train ride back, only the shock of colour returning to the trees, the smell of food that wasn't made from powdered bones, and the moment, after all those years, when you finally cross back into Germany, older, smaller, like someone who got left out in the snow too long and never quite thawed right. You don't recognise the country they send you back to. Germany, sure, it's still called that. But this isn't the Germany you marched off to war for. or the one you remembered through the frostbite haze in Siberia. It's split now, like a broken plate clumsily glued together, and you, fresh off the train, skin tight over your bones, a stranger in your own boots, step onto soil that technically belongs to you, but feels entirely foreign. The train wheezes into a bombed-out station that barely deserves the name. No banners, no fanfare. Just a group of men, some in patched civilian clothes, others still in tattered uniforms, standing around in awkward silence, waiting to be told what to do next. You're processed by men who look only slightly more alive than you. Papers are stamped, names scribbled. You're given a stale roll and some watery coffee, and that's it. You're free, whatever that means now. The first thing you notice is the quiet. The war left behind a noise-shaped hole in everything. No trucks, no sirens, no stomping boots, just wind and the low murmur of people trying to rebuild their lives from the debris. Some towns are still half rubble, buildings missing entire walls like open dollhouses. Other places have been scrubbed so clean by the Allies they feel artificial, like museum replicas of themselves. You ask about your family, they're gone, house destroyed in an air raid. Your mother may have fled west. No one knows. Maybe she's alive, maybe not. The Red Cross has a wall of names somewhere, but it's a long shot. You feel that familiar weight in your chest again, the one that settled in sometime around Kursk and never quite left. Loss, not loud, not dramatic, just constant. Now comes the next twist in your odyssey, denazification. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, and it sounds official, bureaucratic, like someone's trying to clean the blood off history with a filing cabinet and a stern look. Every German citizen, especially soldiers, has to go through it. You're given a questionnaire. Dozens of questions. Were you a party member? Did you attend meetings? Did you participate in war crimes? Did you report any anti-Nazi behaviour? You answer carefully. You weren't an SS man. You weren't Gestapo. You were just a soldier. You fought because you were told to, because everyone did. You weren't political. That's your story. Whether it's true or not, you're sticking to it. Turns out that's good enough. You're categorised as a Mitläufer, a follower. Not innocent, but not dangerous either. You're allowed to re-enter civilian life with some restrictions. No public office, no leadership roles. Just find a job, keep your head down, and try to forget the last decade ever happened. But where do you even start? There's a kind of caste system now among returning soldiers. Your fate depends heavily on who captured you. If the Americans or British held you, you likely had a less brutal time. You may have even picked up some English, eaten real bread, maybe even talked to friendly guards who slipped you cigarettes and advice. Those men come back in slightly better shape, physically, emotionally, spiritually. The Soviets? That's a different story. If you survive their camps, you're considered half dead. No one says it outright, but people see it. You walk differently, flinch at loud noises, sleep with one eye open. Civilians give you wary looks not just because of your past, but because of what you might have brought back with you. Disease, violence, communist ideas, trauma, and then there's the French. If you got caught by them, you were likely sent to rebuild what your army destroyed. Roads, railways, farms. For a lot of German POWs in French custody, freedom came only after years of grueling labour under the same sun they once marched under with rifles and flags. Some stayed so long they forgot how to be civilians at all. Back to you. You end up in a village in what's now the American zone. It's not home. Your hometown is a skeleton somewhere near Dresden. But it's livable. You rent a bed from a widow with a sharp tongue and a limp. She doesn't ask questions. She just leaves bread and bitter coffee in the mornings, and says things like, "Try not to look so much like a soldier." You find work hauling bricks for a reconstruction crew. The pay is pathetic, but the food is regular and the company tolerable. Men like you, survivors, not heroes, lifting stone in silence, building walls you once blew up. The irony isn't lost on you. Sometimes a younger man, too young to have served, asks about the war. You tell him about hunger, about frostbite, about mud, never about the fighting, never about the screams. Here's a curious detail. In some areas, returning soldiers form unofficial clubs to find each other. Not exactly veteran associations, those aren't allowed yet, but loose networks. One man owns a butcher shop, another repairs bicycles. They help each other out, share tips, share pain. You get invited to one after 6 months of brick dust and empty evenings. You go. You sit in a cellar beneath a bakery and sip cheap schnapps with a dozen other men who all carry the same invisible baggage. You share stories in half sentences. I was in Poland. I was at Leningrad. I got back last winter. No one says what they did. No one has to. The pauses do all the talking. One man, older than the rest, jokes that he got captured by the British and spent the war in a Scottish camp, eating better than he did back home. He even learned to play cricket, whatever that is. You all laugh. Real laughter, not the brittle kind that shatters under pressure, and for a second it feels almost normal. But then the conversation turns. Someone asks if you think the world will ever forgive you. Someone else shrugs. They don't have to. We haven't even forgiven ourselves. There's an ongoing debate about all this, how guilty the average German soldier really was. Some say the Wehrmacht was clean, that the real crimes were committed by the SS and the political officers. Others argue that everyone was complicit, knowingly or not. Historians still can't agree. You don't pretend to know the answer. You only know what you saw, what you did, and what you'll never talk about. At night, back in your rented room, you lie awake and stare at the ceiling. You still sleep on the floor out of habit. Your boots are always within arm's reach, and sometimes, when the wind whistles through the broken shutters just right, it sounds like artillery in the distance. You clench your fists until the ghost of the sound passes. One morning you wake up and realise it's been a full year since you returned. A year. You're still here, still breathing, still trying to remember how to be a person. The war might be over, but whatever came after, this is something else entirely. You hear the music first, floating over the rows of tents and prefab barracks like it doesn't quite belong here. Swing jazz. American. The kind you once heard on contraband radios, played low enough that neighbours wouldn't rat you out. Now it's blasting from a scratched phonograph, and the song ends with some soldier hollering "Hot damn" into the warm French air. You're standing in Camp Lucky Strike again, but this time you're not one of the starved, miserable new arrivals. You're one of the ones still waiting to leave. After the Soviet handovers and shifting borders, not all German prisoners stayed in one system. Some, like you surprisingly, found themselves boomeranged back into Western hands. Maybe it was a clerical error, maybe your paperwork got lost, or maybe someone decided you were more useful in France. No one ever explained. One day you were freezing in a Soviet holding area, and the next you were herded onto a train heading west. Now you're here, at a French-run camp that used to be American, and it's different. The Americans built these camps as temporary waypoints for their own troops during the last stages of the war. Camps with names like Lucky Strike, Old Gold, and Chesterfield, all named after cigarette brands. There was a sort of swagger to it, a commercial optimism baked into the whole thing. These weren't death camps or punishment zones. They were stops on the road home, at least originally. But now they've been retrofitted to hold German POWs, many of whom had been shuttled around for years like wartime IQ US. The barbed wire is still there, sure, but so are the remnants of the camp's former life. Canteens, jukeboxes, even a makeshift stage someone once used for USO shows. And you, somehow, are now stuck in this surreal purgatory of swing music and rationed bread. The French now run the place. They're not exactly hostile, but there's a tightness in their eyes that never quite relaxes. You don't blame them. You've seen what German tanks did to their villages. Some guards seem tired, others bitter. A few are quietly curious about you, but they never ask. They just watch, like they're trying to see if you're still dangerous. The food here isn't terrible. There's meat every few days, potatoes, soup that tastes like actual soup. You've started to put weight back on. Your cheekbones are no longer trying to cut through your skin. There's even a barber, a real one, who gives you a shave with a practiced hand and calls you Mon Capitaine with a smirk, even though you've told him you were a private. And yet, this is not freedom. Each day starts with a roll call and ends with boredom. The men are restless. Some try to turn the camp into a small village. There's a chess club, a sketch artist who'll draw you for a piece of chocolate. One guy teaches French to others in exchange for help writing letters. But for the most part, you just wait. For what? No one knows anymore. Then the work starts. You're led out in groups, handed tools and marched to nearby towns. You fix roads, clear debris, stack bricks for houses you once tried to destroy. The irony burns in your throat sometimes, but not enough to stop you from working. The French watch closely. Some say nothing. Others spit at your boots. One older woman throws a potato at your head and calls you Bosch. It bounces off your shoulder, and you mutter merci out of sheer absurdity. Still, There are moments. Small ones. A French farmer gives you an apple and nods once solemnly. A girl no older than your sister, if she's still alive, waves from a window. A black cat curls around your legs while you sweep rubble off a broken sidewalk. You're not welcome here, not really, but you're not being actively hunted either. That counts for something. Here's something odd. Some men actually prefer it here. You hear it whispered at night, how they'd rather stay in this camp, in this weird limbo, than return to whatever disaster their homes have become. For them, the war ended here, and restarting life from scratch out there seems impossible. You can't entirely disagree. Out there, you're a soldier with no army, a man with no address. In here, at least, you're fed and accounted for. That idea sits uncomfortably with you. One of the guards, a wiry man named Lefebvre, surprises you one afternoon by speaking fluent German. You're stacking crates, and he just casually slips into it like he's been eavesdropping for weeks. Turns out he fought in the First World War, captured by Germans, spent 2 years in a camp outside Berlin. He tells you this without heat, as if sharing trivia. Then he says, "Now we are even," and walks away. There's a historical footnote tucked into this part of the story. Some German POWs remained in France for years after the war ended. The French needed labour. Their infrastructure was a skeleton. They argued convincingly that using German manpower was both efficient and justified. After all, if you help destroy it, why shouldn't you help rebuild it? This wasn't hidden either. It was agreed upon in the higher-ups' post-war deals. And for some soldiers, the temporary captivity stretched on well into the late 1940s. One man you meet says he was only released in 1950, 5 years after the war's end. He jokes that he might as well apply for French citizenship. No one laughs. So you keep working. You help fix a bridge. You lay concrete on a country road. One day they even let you inside a partially rebuilt school to help paint the walls. You dip the brush in white paint and feel a strange, shaky peace settle in your chest. You're no longer unmaking things, you're building. That night you write a letter. You don't know if it'll ever be delivered. You don't even know if anyone's still alive to receive it, but you write it anyway. You apologise, not for the war, not exactly, but for your part in the machine, for surviving while others didn't, for being part of something too big and awful to fully understand even now. Then one morning, without warning, your name is called again. A list is posted. Some of you are going home. There's no ceremony, no applause, just a small cardboard suitcase, a train ticket, and an escort to the station. The platform is crowded with others in your shoes, faces thin and tired, but lit up with something you haven't seen in a long time. Hope. As the train pulls away, you look back one last time at the camp. There's a man still painting that school wall, another pushing a cart full of bricks. You wonder if they'll leave soon. You wonder if they even want to. And then you face forward, toward home, whatever that means now. You roll across the border into what used to be Germany, but it's more accurate now to say you roll into a war-shaped question mark. The train grinds along crooked rails through landscapes that look like black and white photographs come to life. Burnt forests, abandoned farms, towns missing their hearts. This isn't homecoming. It's a slow reintroduction to a country you don't recognise anymore. And the scariest part, you're not even sure you belong in it. The train stops more often than it moves. Some villages don't even have names on the signs anymore. Just hollowed-out shells of places that once had bakeries and children and dance halls. You watch people getting off, scattering like dust in the wind. Some are returning to families, some just step off into the unknown, hoping their memories will line up with the new geography of ruin. When your stop comes, it's barely a platform, just a dirt path and a sign leaning like it gave up trying to stand straight. You haul your suitcase, what little of it hasn't already fallen apart, and step off the train. The station is gone. Your boots crunch on glass, gravel and ash. It's a warm day, but the air smells faintly of soot. No one meets you. No one expected you. No one even knew you were still alive. You start walking. The road toward your village is still there, more or less, though it's been half-eaten by weeds. You pass a burned-out tractor, an overgrown orchard. Then, after what feels like hours, you crest the hill and see it. Your hometown, or what's left of it. The centre is gone, just rubble. One wall of the old church still stands, jutting into the sky like a broken tooth. The bakery where you used to sneak warm rolls as a kid, a blackened husk. A few houses have survived on the outskirts. You head toward them, not really knowing why. A man steps out of one of the doors, looks at you and squints like he's trying to place a face that died a long time ago. "You're one of the soldiers," he says, not asking, just stating. You nod. "They said none of you would come back." That's all he offers before going back inside. There's a cold fact you don't fully absorb until later. For many families, missing in action became a kind of mental burial. Funerals without coffins, altars with no names. Some were relieved their sons didn't return, less explaining to do. Others had simply moved on. Widows remarried, parents relocated, siblings grew distant. When you show up at the door, it's not always welcome. It's a disruption, a ghost with paperwork. You find a corner of a barn to sleep in that night. The rats are polite enough to wait until you fall asleep before exploring your boots. In the morning, you find an old woman who remembers you and points to a small cottage at the edge of the village. It was your uncle's. He died in 1944. No heirs. "You can stay there," she says. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't shut the door on you either. That counts as warmth now, so you clean it. Day by day, broken windows, mould, dust thick enough to choke a cow, but you do it. Because it's something. Because it's yours, or close enough. You trade some labour for soap and bread. You join a small group of men rebuilding part of the road leading into town. You keep your head down and your past even lower. But the thing about silence is that it eventually gets filled. After a few weeks, people start asking, "Where were you? What did you see? Were you on the Eastern Front? Did you ever meet them? The ones in black uniforms? Did you believe in it?" You learn to dodge, to say, "I was just a soldier," or "I was drafted early." That's enough for some, not for others. One man shouts at you in the tavern one night, says your kind burned his brother's farm near Smolensk. You don't argue, you let him shout. Maybe he needs it more than you need to defend yourself. That's the unspoken rule now. Let them scream. You're used to taking orders, and yet, for all the tension, there's also something stranger happening. Germany is rebuilding, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. New laws, new towns, new identities. Factories that once made tanks are now repurposed to make appliances. There's talk of the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, but it hasn't reached you yet. You're still scraping together coins to buy butter. Then one day someone offers you a real job. It's a quarry. Manual labour, of course, but legal. Pays in actual marks. The foreman is an American-backed German who talks fast and works faster. He doesn't care about your past, only your back. You take it. You lift stones for 10 hours a day and come home too tired to dream. The silence in your head becomes manageable. There's a debate even today about how the West Germans handled returning soldiers. Were they welcomed back too easily? Did the post-war society sweep too much under the rug in its rush to modernise and forget? Historians argue both sides, but you don't feel forgotten. You feel watched. Quietly. Constantly. Everyone pretending the war's behind them, while still glancing sideways whenever someone new walks into a room. There's a curious little fact that floats around in the margins of this chapter. Some German POWs didn't want to come home at all. Some had spent so long in Allied custody, in the US, Canada, even the UK, that they'd come to prefer it. Clean beds, food, distance from their own guilt. A few stayed, married locals, found peace in exile. You envy them sometimes. Still, you push on, you wake, you work, you mend a hole in your coat, you plant a tomato in a garden you didn't know was fertile, you fix the cottage door so it doesn't creak like a dying thing every time the wind hits it. Small victories. Then, one morning, you find a letter in your mailbox, if it can still be called that. The name on it stops your breath cold. It's your mother, alive, in another part of Germany. She writes simply, "She never thought you survived. She's remarried. There's a half-brother now. She hopes you're well, would like to see you." You don't cry. You just sit on the steps and let the air move through you like a wind in an abandoned house. Maybe you think the world hasn't entirely moved on without you. Not yet. The return letter takes you a full week to write, not because you don't know what to say, but because you're afraid of what saying it might mean. How do you sum up what happened between the moment you stepped onto a transport truck in 1941 and the moment you found your name, smudged but still legible, on a letter from a woman who once kissed your forehead before your first school exam? You start simple. I'm alive. Then you try to describe the shape of your life now, the quarry job, the cottage, the strange quiet of a world that's still learning how to speak again. You don't write about the camps. Not yet. You send it, then wait. 2 weeks later, another letter arrives. Shorter this time. She's glad. She asks if you're eating well. She includes a photograph. It's her, older but still recognisable, standing beside a boy, your half-brother, on a swing set made of metal pipe and wartime scrap. His smile is too wide for the world he's growing up in. You decide to visit. The train ride is longer than expected, meandering through West Germany like it's as unsure of itself as you are. When you finally arrive at her town, a small city that managed to keep its bones intact during the war, you hesitate at the platform. You half expect her not to be there, but then, across the crowd, you spot her. She's shorter than you remember, wrapped in a worn coat, her hands twisting around each other like she's trying to wring the nerves out of her fingers. You walk to her. She looks up. For a second, neither of you moves. Then she reaches out and touches your cheek, almost like she's testing whether you're real. You stay with her for 3 days. Her home is modest but warm. Her husband is polite, if distant. An older man with stiff hands and a mechanical limp. He doesn't ask questions. The boy, your half-brother, treats you like a curiosity, stares at your boots, asks if you've ever seen a tank. You lie and say no. On the last night, your mother makes tea and you sit in the kitchen, lights dim, and listening to the distant sound of a radio playing something classical. Brahms, maybe. She finally asks where you've been. You tell her just enough. The American camp. The French labour. The years with no seasons in Siberia. She listens without interrupting, nodding occasionally, her eyes never leaving yours. You were always too good at surviving, she says softly, like it's both a compliment and a curse. The next morning you leave. She packs you a small bundle of bread and dried fruit. As the train pulls away, you watch her wave, hand trembling, eyes glassy. You wonder if you'll ever see her again. You don't. But you keep the photo of her and the boy on your shelf for years, the paper curling slightly at the edges with time. Back home, life narrows again. You go back to the quarry. The routine becomes muscle memory, but the world is shifting fast outside your little circle of stone and splinters. Germany is dividing, east and west no longer just lines on a map, but entirely different futures unfolding in opposite directions. And Berlin? It's no longer a city you can just visit. It's a symbol now, a wound. And like most wounds, it will fester before it scars. You hear rumours. Soviet-held German soldiers still in camp, still unreturned. Some captured in 1945 are still labouring under the frostbitten watch of guards who never forgot Stalingrad. One man in your work crew says he saw a prisoner returned just last week, skin like parchment, eyes like cracked marbles. He didn't speak, the man says, just kept staring at the sky like it owed him something. There's a growing movement in the newspapers, calls to bring the last POWs home. People start writing letters to officials, clergy petition foreign governments, the West Germans try to negotiate, the Soviets shrug. You can't stop thinking about the men you left behind, Becker with the crooked smile, Rauch, who used to sing during snowstorms. You still see them in your dreams sometimes, standing in the mines with their tools like grave markers. Here's something historians don't always mention. Some of the last German soldiers didn't return from Soviet captivity until 1955. A full decade after the war ended. 10 years. That's longer than the war itself. One returned POW, interviewed later in life, said, "By the time I came back, my son was a teenager and my wife had a new husband. I felt like a ghost wearing the wrong face." You write your own letters to the Red Cross. Ask if anyone from your unit has returned. No answers. Just silence. In the meantime, a man from the town hall comes to the quarry one day, asking if anyone would be willing to help identify remains. Not bodies, just the aftermath. Piles of helmets, boots, some dog tags. He says they've found a burial site from the early years of the war, outside a collapsed farmhouse. You volunteer, maybe out of guilt, maybe because you're hoping to find something that makes sense. What you find instead are fragments. Metal warped by heat, bones curled in unnatural shapes, letters half burned, their ink bleeding into the soil. You help catalogue what can be recovered, and that night you soak your hands in vinegar and sit in the dark with a glass of schnapps that does nothing to dull the images. Somewhere in all of this you meet someone. Her name is Lotte. She works in a bakery rebuilt from scratch by a war widow and her 2 daughters. Lotte isn't impressed by your past. She doesn't ask about your service. She's more interested in whether you can help her lift flour sacks, and if you're smart enough to keep your mouth shut when she's trying to do 6 things at once. You find that refreshing. You visit often, at first for the bread, then for the company. She's funny in a dry, unsentimental way. One day she hands you a loaf without charging you. Your loyalty card, she jokes. 5th loaf is free if you look like you've had a mental breakdown at least once during the war. You marry her 2 years later. There's no church wedding, just a legal document and a small gathering with more soup than ceremony. She wears a dress borrowed from her sister. You wear your only good shirt. She laughs when you drop the ring. It feels like the first time you've exhaled in years. At night she asks you about the war, not often, just now and then, like testing the temperature of water. You tell her bits and pieces. She listens, then moves closer, like the act of not running away is enough. It is. And so you begin again. Not as a soldier, not even really as a former prisoner, just as a man with a bakery wife, calloused hands, and memories that visit less often now. But when they do, they come quietly, like old friends who overstayed their welcome but still know where the spare key is hidden. You don't realise you're being re-educated until it's already halfway done. It's subtle, almost polite, wrapped in pamphlets, news bulletins, radio programmes with dramatic music and smooth-voiced narrators. You sit in a local hall one evening with half the town, packed shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches, watching a projection screen flicker to life. No one really explains why you're there. It's just something you're expected to do now, like paying taxes or pretending you never saluted. The film begins with soft music and then cuts to footage of barbed wire, skeletal figures, the unmistakable footage of what the Americans found when they opened the gates of Bergen-Belsen. You knew the camps existed. Everyone knew. But this is the first time you're being shown, forced to see it, to feel it. The smell comes back to you even though you were never there. It creeps in from memory, from guilt, from the places you did patrol, where you saw things and did nothing because doing something would have been suicide. People shift uncomfortably in their seats. A woman behind you stifles a gasp. Someone else mutters under their breath. The images keep rolling. Piles of shoes, rooms full of hair, children staring blankly into the camera. Then the narrator speaks over it all, slow and measured, explaining that this wasn't just a fringe horror, it was central, that the German people either knew or chose not to know, and now the world expects you to look directly at what was done in your name. The lights come up and no one claps. There's no applause for moral clarity. Outside, the night is heavy. You light a cigarette and stare at the stars, wondering how they can still be up there, unchanged, as if nothing down here happened. This is what the Allies call re-education. It's not just about denazifying textbooks and banning flags. It's about shaping what you think, or at least what you're willing to say out loud. They want to scrub the poison out of the country, by films, lectures, even school plays performed by children too young to know what a swastika is. They pass out leaflets that explain democracy like it's a new kind of soap. Clean, scented, something you should definitely use, or else. Some men mock it. Others sit quietly, letting the words settle in. You're stuck in the middle. You never believed deeply in anything. Not Hitler, not ideology, not even victory. You believed in your orders, in your unit, in the next warm meal. But now you're starting to wonder if that kind of apathy is its own kind of crime, the kind that lets the engine run smoothly while everyone looks away. Later that week, you attend another session, this one led by a German man in a tweed jacket who talks about justice and memory. He says the country needs to confront what it did, not to wallow in guilt, but to understand it, to prevent it from happening again. Some men scoff, but others nod, eyes on the floor. The speaker ends with a phrase that sticks with you. We must learn to be ashamed without being destroyed by it. At home, Lotte notices something's off. You've been quieter than usual, sitting longer at the table after dinner, cigarette turning to ash in your fingers. One night she finally asks what's bothering you. Did you know, you ask her, about the camps? She doesn't answer right away. Then, I heard things, rumours, but I didn't want to believe them. You nod. It's not good enough. But it's honest, and it's the same answer you would have given a year ago. You don't sleep much that night. Here's something that doesn't always make the history books. Some German soldiers, after seeing those films or hearing the testimonies, broke down. Not all, but some. A few even took their own lives, overwhelmed by guilt, or shame, or maybe the terrifying realization that they'd marched through history wearing blinders. You knew one, a man from your unit who'd made it back from Soviet captivity. You ran into him months ago, thin as a scarecrow, but with a fire in his eyes like he'd seen something unbearable. He hung himself in his father's barn 3 weeks after the screening started. No note, just silence. Re-education continues in other forms. You attend workshops about democracy, how to vote, how to challenge authority without being arrested. It feels absurd, like being taught how to breathe, but you realise how little you actually knew. Under the Reich, you didn't question orders. You didn't ask who was making the laws or why. Now you're being told that it's your right, even your duty, to question everything, to argue, to refuse. It's unsettling. You find yourself walking to the town library, leafing through books you never would have touched before. One afternoon you stumble across a banned volume, something that would have gotten someone imprisoned 5 years ago. It's about the Treaty of Versailles and how post-World War I bitterness bred the perfect soil for fascism. You check it out, read it cover to cover. For the first time, you start to understand how history isn't just a string of events, it's choices, millions of them, made by people just like you. There's debate now, even among the scholars being sent into towns to oversee re-education, about whether it's working. Some argue it's too forced. Others say it's the only way to plant a new future. No one really knows. This isn't a reset button. It's reconstruction, and not everyone agrees on how deep the rot goes. There's a strange little fact you hear at one of the lectures. In the years immediately following the war, many Germans claimed they never supported the Nazis at all. But statistical analysis of voting records and party membership tells a different story. It's easier to pretend you were never on board when the ship sinks, you suppose. Still, something begins to shift in you. You don't become an activist. You don't start giving speeches. But you do begin to teach your half-brother, through letters, then in person when he visits, the importance of thinking for himself. You tell him not to salute anyone unless he chooses to. You teach him how to spot lies dressed as patriotism. When he writes back, he asks you about democracy, and you answer, carefully, honestly, as best you can. Lotta notices the change too. She says you're lighter now, not happier but less heavy. She tells you you've stopped grinding your teeth in your sleep. You didn't even know you were doing that. One night she finds you rereading the letter your mother sent years ago, the one with the photo. She wraps her arms around you from behind and rests her chin on your shoulder. "We survived," she says. You nod, still staring at the boy on the swing. "For now," you reply, "but maybe that's the beginning." The French call it travail obligatoire, mandatory work. You call it another chapter of penance, but with fewer guards and slightly better bread. Months after your re-education began, a letter arrives. Not from your mother or the bakery, but from a French administrator with a name you can't pronounce and a very firm tone. You're being invited, which is a nice way of saying required, to contribute to reconstruction efforts in France. They need men who know how to use tools, handle stone, follow orders. You check all 3 boxes, unfortunately. You thought your Labour days were behind you. After Siberia, after Lucky Strike, after hauling bricks in the cold for people who watched you like you might start goose-stepping any minute. You really thought you were done being anyone's post-war draft animal. But the truth is you could use the money, and maybe the distance. Lotta doesn't protest. She's practical. You'll be gone a few months, she says, and she'll manage the bakery just fine. She kisses you on the cheek and hands you a paper-wrapped sandwich. "Don't charm any French widows," she says with a smirk. You take the train south, along with a handful of other men from your region, all of you dressed in patched jackets and carrying that unmistakable former soldier stiffness in your shoulders. Some have done this before. Others are like you, tired, curious, a little nervous about digging up old resentments in someone else's backyard. You arrive in a small French town nestled between hills that still bear the faint scars of artillery shelling. It's beautiful in that quiet, reluctant way, like a place that's learning to breathe again after holding its breath for too long. Your accommodations are dormitory style, 1 room, 10 bunks, the faint smell of mould and paint. But there's hot water twice a week, and the bread is strangely good. You'll survive. The job? Rebuilding a bridge. The irony is immediate and not lost on anyone. You're handed a set of tools and pointed toward the remains of a stone crossing that your own Luftwaffe probably blew to pieces 5 years ago. Now, you're stacking bricks, pouring cement, mixing mortar. You work alongside French labourers, most of whom don't speak to you for the first few weeks. Then one day someone cracks a joke. You don't catch all the words, but the tone is unmistakable. A French worker, older, bald, missing part of a finger, mutters something about how, at least the Boches finally learned how to hold a trowel instead of a rifle. One of your German companions starts to snap back, but you touch his arm and shake your head. Let it go. You've heard worse, in 3 languages. But then something odd happens. The old man laughs, and says, "Well, at least you're better at this than our mayor." A few other French workers chuckle, and just like that the line softens. That afternoon someone passes you a tin mug of watered-down wine at break time. You drink it, nod thanks, and feel the ice begin to crack. Over the next few weeks, the silence gives way to a cautious rhythm. You don't speak the same language, not fluently, but you start learning the important words: passerelle, bridge, attention, lunch. One of the Frenchmen, Henri, teaches you phrases while you mix cement, slipping between insults and useful nouns with a grin that grows on you. You ask him one day if he was in the war. He shrugs. Of course. Everyone was. I dug graves. Then he goes back to chiselling stone like it's just another Tuesday. There's an unspoken truce among the workers. You don't ask about the resistance. They don't ask if you wore a black uniform. You exist in the neutral zone of necessity, bound together by the physics of concrete and deadlines. And you learn that reconstruction is its own kind of healing. It doesn't erase what was broken, but it gives your hands something to do, and sometimes that's enough to keep the ghosts from shouting. Here's a lesser-known truth. France used nearly 1 million German prisoners of war for labour after the war. Some were treated decently, others not so much. Officially it wasn't about revenge, but unofficially, for many towns it felt like justice served with a trowel and a wheelbarrow. Some German labourers never made it home, not because they were executed, nothing dramatic like that. They just faded into the French countryside. Married locals, changed names, became someone else. Henri tells you about one. He stayed after the bridge was done, lives up the hill now, makes wine, has a dog that hates everyone except him. You ask what his name is? Don't know. Everyone just calls him l'Allemand, the German. You wonder what it would take to disappear like that, to let go of the weight on your back and become someone new in a place where no one expects you to carry it. But you don't stay. The bridge is finished, and the job ends. There's a small ceremony, nothing grand, just some wine and soft applause from townspeople who pretend not to remember who dropped the bombs. The mayor shakes your hand. A local girl hands you a tiny bouquet of wildflowers. You tuck it into your coat pocket and leave it there until it wilts. You take the train back north, to Lotte, to your tiny house with the leaky roof and the tomato plants. She meets you at the station with a smile that says she worried the whole time but won't admit it. You walk home together under a sky that's beginning to hint at spring. You tell her about the bridge, about Henri, about the joke that broke the ice. She listens, nodding, and then tells you that the bakery's been busier lately, that she hired a neighbour's daughter to help with deliveries, that there's talk of the town opening a new school soon. I think, she says, we might be turning into people again. You lie awake that night, staring at the ceiling. You think about the bridge, about Henri's missing finger, about the wildflowers now pressed between the pages of a French grammar book you borrowed and never returned. Maybe rebuilding isn't just about towns or roads or economies. Maybe it's about the invisible things too. Trust, memory, forgiveness, even if it's only partial. And in your dreams that night you're back on that bridge, but this time you're not wearing boots. You're barefoot, standing in the sun, mortar on your hands, and no one is shouting. You never thought you'd wear a uniform again, not after everything. Not after stripping out of the last one like a snake shedding a skin too heavy to carry any farther. And yet, here you are, standing in front of a wooden desk, a pen in your hand, signing your name at the bottom of a form with the Black Eagle of West Germany stamped across the top. No swastika this time, just a clean bureaucratic bird, arms wide open. You're being registered into a labour battalion. It's not technically military service, but it smells like it, feels like it, marches like it, only with less shouting. Germany, or at least the chunk of it not painted Soviet red, is trying to rebuild itself with what it has. Rubble, ration cards, and a sea of men who can follow orders. You're one of them. The labour battalions are made up of ex-soldiers, young men too scarred for office work and too strong to be left idle. You wear a jacket with no insignia and carry tools instead of weapons, but there's still formation, still structure, Still that quiet, unspoken hum of "we used to be something else." The pay's nothing special, but it's regular. Meals are basic but filling. You're assigned to repair electrical lines along rural roads in the British occupation zone. It's not glamorous, but it feels clean. After years of digging in mud and blood, rewiring a power pole feels like a small miracle. The wind whistles through the fields as you climb up one of the poles, and for the first time in a long while, you're doing something that doesn't feel like atonement. It just feels like work. You bunk with 5 other men in a converted schoolhouse. There are jokes, card games, a stove that barely works, and a rotating argument about who snores the loudest. Most nights end with stories, some invented, some true. No one tells the whole truth, that's a given. But piece by piece the war creeps into the room like a cold draft. One man, Carl, admits he saw the inside of a concentration camp. Another, Thomas, claims he deserted in '44 and spent the rest of the war pretending to be deaf in a village outside Munich. You don't judge, you just listen. Sometimes you talk too. You mention the French bridge, the bakery, the tomato plants. You don't talk about the Eastern Front or Siberia, or that one winter where your frostbitten fingers couldn't feel the trigger anymore. Those memories are buried deep like unexploded ordnance, best left untouched. And yet the past keeps finding ways to surface. One day, you're repairing a line outside a small village when an old man comes out of his house with a cane and a hard stare. He watches you work for a long time before finally speaking. "I remember you," he says, "or someone who looked like you." You look down from your perch, squinting. "I was in Belgium," he adds. "I saw soldiers marching through my street. Killed my cousin, burned our cart." You climb down slowly, careful not to rush, not to provoke. When you reach the ground, you nod once, not in agreement, but acknowledgement. You don't argue, you don't apologize. You let the silence stretch until he nods back, just slightly, and turns away. That night, you tell the story to Lotta in a letter. You don't dramatize it, just the facts. She writes back a week later and says, "That sounds like closure, or the beginning of it." The battalion work is hard but steady. You travel from town to town, repairing, hauling, even clearing out old Nazi bunkers to be repurposed as storage units or, strangely, a post office. You think about how many of those walls once echoed with orders barked in hate, and now they hold letters and packages. It's darkly poetic. Here's something most people don't realise. These post-war labour units weren't just punishment or filler. They were a kind of purgatory for men like you, expendable enough not to be missed, valuable enough not to be discarded. You weren't considered a criminal, not officially, but you weren't innocent either. You were somewhere in between, and the state didn't quite know what to do with people like you, so it put you to work and hoped the years would make you invisible. But you weren't invisible, not entirely. One afternoon, your battalion is called to a forest just outside Kassel. Someone's found a cache, old weapons, papers, maybe a radio. Your job is to dig it up, report it, turn it over. When you reach the site, it's exactly what they said. A long-buried bunker, half collapsed, swallowed by earth and moss. You step inside and the air goes still. You see the outlines of a past that refuses to rot. Helmets, canteens, even a faded propaganda poster flapping against the wall like a ghost trying to breathe. You find a box of letters, water-damaged but still legible. One of them is dated 1943, signed by someone with your last name. Not a relative, as far as you know, just someone who once wore the same uniform and believed in something you barely remember now. You hand the box over without reading the rest. That night you light a candle and sit alone. Not out of sadness, but to think. You wonder how many men left traces like that. Letters, boots, a smudge of blood on a floorboard. You wonder how long the earth will keep coughing them up. 10 years? 100? There's a fringe theory you once overheard in the barracks, from a man who read too much and talked too little. He said history is a kind of echo, not a timeline. That we don't move forward so much as we move in circles, repeating ourselves with slightly different costumes. You laughed at the time. Now, you're not so sure. Eventually the Labour Battalion disbands. Germany is rebuilding faster now. The Marshall Plan is pumping in money. Factories are waking up. You're given a certificate that confirms your participation and a small bonus in pay. It's the bureaucratic version of a handshake. Cold, dry, and over too quickly. You return home, to Lotta and the bakery, to your tomato plants and your rusty tools. You hang the certificate on the wall for a few weeks, then take it down. It doesn't really mean anything, not to you. But you do start to walk a little taller, not out of pride, out of practice, out of repetition, out of the sense that, for the first time in a decade, no one's shouting orders or counting you among the lost. You're not a soldier anymore. You're not a prisoner. You're just a man with work behind him and work ahead. And for now, that's enough. It starts with names in a newspaper. At first, you barely notice. Just a passing headline about a trial in Nuremberg. Then it keeps happening. More names, more trials, photographs of pale men in the dock with sunken eyes and pressed suits. You recognise some of the faces. You don't know them, but you've seen their photos before, on posters, in the officers' barracks, or whispered about during those late-night cigarettes in occupied territories. These were men who stood above you in the chain of command, high enough that you never dreamed of crossing paths, but close enough that their orders shaped the war you lived through. Now they're being tried, publicly, and it feels surreal. You sit in the bakery one quiet afternoon, dusting flour off your hands and reading the paper as Lotte sweeps. The article is about Hermann Göring, his trial, his arrogance, his suicide before the noose. You skim the text, then read it again slower. There's a strange feeling in your chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, but something tighter, stranger. Like being handed a puzzle piece from a picture you never wanted to see finished. The Nuremberg trials become unavoidable. They're on the radio, in pamphlets, posted on walls outside city buildings. For the first time since 1945, the conversation isn't just about rebuilding, it's about remembering, reckoning. You realise the war isn't over. Not really. It's just changed venues, from the battlefield to the courtroom, and you start to wonder, how far up the ladder does guilt travel before it stops feeling like yours? One evening, Lotte brings home a magazine with a double-page spread of courtroom sketches. The accused look tired, sagging in their chairs, their faces etched with that awful blend of defiance and regret. You stare at it over dinner, not realising your fork has been suspended halfway to your mouth for several minutes. They're not just blaming the top, Lotte says quietly. There are whispers about mid-level officers, commanders, even medics, anyone who signed off on anything. You nod slowly. You were never high-ranking, never led a squad. You were a foot soldier, a cog, but you were there. You marched through Poland, slept in a requisitioned farmhouse outside Minsk. You remember a man who boasted that he'd turned in his own cousin for hoarding bread. That man never returned from the East. You remember helping load train cars and never asking what they carried. The trial articles include terms that once belonged only to philosophers and theologians: crimes against humanity, collective guilt, individual responsibility. Now they're law, and they're sharp. You hear about a man from your battalion, Sturmer, who gets arrested. Not a high-profile figure, just a logistics officer. Apparently he signed a requisition form for camp supplies in 1943. Now that form is evidence. He's being held pending investigation. Another man you knew was denounced by a neighbour, just disappeared one night. No trial yet, just silence. And this is where the fear creeps in, quietly, like mould between floorboards. The Allies promised fair trials, but it's not always clear what fair means. People are still furious, rightly so. But when fury becomes policy, everyone looks over their shoulder. You start sleeping lighter again. Every knock on the door makes your spine lock. You even rehearse what you'll say if questioned, if accused, not because you think you did something criminal, but because war is messy, and guilt is sticky, and memory is unreliable. One night you walk into town and find a new notice posted outside the mayor's office. It lists names, men being called in for questioning. No charges yet, just questioning. You don't see your name, but it's close. A man with your last name but a different first name. Still, your pulse skips. The mayor says it's part of the denazification effort, but this feels different, sharper, more personal, and it's not just the Allies anymore, it's Germans pointing fingers now, accusing. Some of it's real, some of it's revenge. That's the part no one wants to talk about, that in the rubble of defeat, with houses burned and families gone, old grudges slip on the mask of justice and become something else. In one case, a woman accuses a neighbour of being an SS officer. Turns out he was a coal worker the whole war. Still, he's detained for a month before they clear his name. By then, his reputation is ruined. And then comes the question you dread most. Did you ever see anything? You're asked by a local committee, an offshoot of the Re-Education Board. It's not a court, just a room with 3 chairs and a blackboard and 2 men with pens. You sit down and they offer you coffee. You decline. They ask about your unit, where you were posted, what you saw, what you knew. You tell the truth, the official, sanitized version of it. You don't lie, but you don't volunteer either. They take notes, nod occasionally, ask if you ever witnessed executions. You shake your head, heart pounding, suddenly aware of how thin the line is between memory and omission. They thank you for your time and say you'll be notified if they need anything else. You leave, sweating through your shirt, and don't tell Lotta until 3 days later. You did nothing wrong, she says, but it sounds more like hope than certainty. History likes to clean things up with straight lines and bold statements, good and evil, guilty and innocent. But when you lived it, waded through the blood and ash and contradiction, those lines blur. Not all monsters wore medals, not all heroes survived, and not everyone who stayed silent did so out of cruelty. Sometimes it was fear, or confusion, or exhaustion. Still, silence doesn't absolve you. You know that now. There's a debate, ongoing, heated, about whether the trials went far enough or too far. Some say too many slipped through the cracks. Others say the whole system was flawed from the start, with the victors prosecuting the defeated while ignoring their own crimes. But for you, the trials aren't theory. They're a mirror. And sometimes mirrors are the cruelest things of all. That winter you visit a memorial unveiled just outside town. It's modest. Stone, carved names, a wreath laid at its base. It's not for the soldiers. It's for the people who didn't come back. Jews, dissidents, the disappeared. You stand there for a long time, cap in hand, snow falling soft on your shoulders. And when you finally speak, it's to no one in particular. I'm sorry. You don't know if it's enough, but it's the truth. Some men vanished at the end of the war like cigarette smoke out a train window. No goodbye, no graves, just a name in a ledger that stops mid-sentence. You don't know where they went, only that they were here one day and gone the next. And in post-war Germany that could mean 100 different things. Dead, escaped, captured again, or maybe just done being German. You start noticing them by the absences. Old friends who should be back by now. Fellow soldiers you last saw in a camp, who never got off the train with you. Rumours spread quietly, like spilled ink soaking into everything. That Holtzmann is living under a fake name in Brazil. That Becker fled to Spain and works in a vineyard. That Menzel joined a monastery somewhere in the Alps and hasn't spoken since 1946. And then there are the ones who didn't vanish on their own. One afternoon, Lotta calls you to the front of the bakery. A customer has left behind a satchel with papers sticking out. You flip through it, looking for a name, and find a letter folded into the back pocket. The return address is Argentina. The handwriting is unmistakably German. The content, not exactly subtle. It's from someone calling himself Franz Adler, probably not his real name, writing to a cousin in Hamburg. He talks about starting over, building a new life on land untainted by guilt. Says he lives near other Germans, even some former officers. It's like Germany, but without the shame, he writes. You hand the letter over to the local police. They take it, nod once, and say nothing more. Later someone tells you that the man who left the satchel had a limp and a Bavarian accent. No one's seen him since that morning. That opens a new door in your mind, one you'd been keeping locked out of self-preservation. Because if there are men walking around with new names, new lives, new countries, what does that make you? The fool for coming home? The honest man in a world full of cowards? There's a theory you've heard whispered in bars and bakeries and repair shops, that some of the worst escaped justice altogether. They fled south, Argentina, Paraguay, Chile, countries that didn't ask too many questions, especially if you arrived with cash, connections, or certain talents. One man, years later, even brags in an overheard conversation that he helped develop irrigation systems for a farming collective funded by former officers. You don't need to ask what kind of officers. And then there's the church. More than once, someone tells you that certain Catholic monasteries helped facilitate quiet disappearances, provided shelter, false documents, routes out through Italy. They call it the rat line. The Vatican denies it, but the whispers persist. A man in town claims his cousin wore a cassock in 46, but in 44 he wore SS black. Now he tends a garden in Florence and keeps his head down. Go figure. You're torn between anger and exhaustion, not just because these men avoided justice, but because they chose not to carry the burden you still drag behind you every day like a busted wheelbarrow. They shrugged off the war like it was a coat they outgrew, and here you are, building a life from the splinters, still waking up from dreams of marching boots and silent trains. You start to pay closer attention in the city. A certain kind of man stands out. Too clean, too watchful. The ones who never flinch when someone says Nuremberg. The ones who never talk about the past, or who pretend to have none. You spot one at a repair shop, another at a train station. Could be nothing, could be everything. One day, you stop a man in a coffee house and ask if he ever served. He stiffens, gives you a polite smile and says, "No, I was in Sweden during the war." But his accent is pure Leipzig, and no one flees to Sweden wearing a Wehrmacht issue overcoat in 1947. You don't press him, you just nod and finish your drink. There's a line in the sand between justice and survival. You walk it every day. You're not a judge, you're not a saint. You are a soldier who didn't pull the trigger every time, but you pulled it enough to earn the silence you live in now. And yet you wonder, what if you had slipped away too? What if, after the camp, the Siberian frost, the rebuilds and tribunal whispers, you had chosen the train south instead of the road home? Could you have lived with yourself in a foreign town where no one knew your name, started fresh, maybe run a little shop by the sea? But here's the thing, you didn't. You came back, faced what waited, married a woman who asks gentle questions, buried your ghosts in tomato soil. You didn't become a new person, you became a better one, slowly, with scars and hesitation but no masks. Lotta sees you staring at the fire one night, your mind clearly elsewhere. She places a mug of tea in front of you, touches your shoulder and says, "Some people carry what they did. Others just run from it," you nod. "And some," she adds, "run because they know no one will carry it for them." There's debate, plenty of it, about how many escaped, how much help they had, and why so few were ever brought back to stand trial. Some argue that the Allies allowed it quietly. Others say the Cold War made certain devils useful. Historians still fight over the numbers, the documents, the implications. But numbers don't visit your dreams at night. Faces do. The man who shared your trench in Poland, who once taught you how to shave with frozen water. The officer who told a village elder to pick one of his sons. The boy who carried a radio and never came back after patrol. And then the ones who disappeared. You don't know if they feel guilt. You don't know if they remember your name. But you remember theirs. That's your sentence. And maybe in its own way your redemption. There's a line painted across the map now, jagged and tense, stretching through hills and train lines in the middle of Berlin like a scar that never fully closed. You hear about it first from the radio, how Germany has been carved like a loaf of bread no one could agree on slicing properly. The East belongs to the Soviets, the West to the Americans, British and French. And just like that, your country is no longer a country. It's two ideas glaring at each other across a barbed wire fence. The newspapers start calling it the Iron Curtain. For you, it starts with a cousin who stops answering letters. You try writing twice, then 3 times. The silence echoes louder with each unanswered envelope. Eventually, a man from the post office shrugs and tells you that mail to the Soviet zone is getting complicated. When you ask what that means, he just lifts one eyebrow and taps the side of his nose, like it's 1942 again, and everything's being said in code. Back home in your little West German town, things are moving fast. Too fast for your bones to keep up. There's talk of NATO, of currency reform, of the Deutsche Mark replacing the worthless Reichsmark you once used to buy a potato and a matchstick. The factories are running again, belching hope into the sky. People have begun repainting their storefronts. Even the school has fresh windows now. And yet, everywhere you look, something's missing. You spot it in the way people glance at maps like they're reading obituaries, in how they talk about the East like it's another planet. It hits hardest when you walk past the train station and see the platform that used to take people to Leipzig, Dresden, even Warsaw. Now those trains don't come, and if they do, they don't stop. One afternoon, a man from your Labour battalion drops by the bakery. His name is Richter, and he's aged worse than you, deep lines like a tree struck too many times by lightning. He says he's trying to cross over to the Soviet zone, wants to find his sister. She stayed, he says, married a man who worked with the Soviets. Thought it would be safer. You ask if he's sure he wants to go, he shrugs. If she's still alive, I owe her more than a letter. You never hear from him again. That's the thing no one says out loud. Once the border really sets, some people just stop existing in your world. Not dead, not gone, just unreachable. It's a new kind of death, quieter than bombs, but no less final. And then come the refugees. They start trickling into town like loose threads pulled from a sweater you thought was finished unravelling. Families from the East, farmers, teachers, tailors. Some walk for days. Others arrive on carts pulled by coughing tractors. They all carry bags, blankets, and stories they only half tell. You see them waiting in line at the bakery, their eyes darting like deer in a clearing. One young man, barely 20, offers to sweep the bakery floor for a loaf of bread. Lotte says yes before you can speak. He works quietly, doesn't smile much. One day, you ask where he's from. Magdeburg, he says. Not anymore. That's how people talk now, in past tense. You learn something strange. The further you get from the war, the more people talk about it like it happened to someone else. But the Cold War, that's happening to you. It's on your doorstep. It's in your radio. It's in the way you lower your voice when talking politics, just in case. There's a moment not long after the border tightens when a childhood friend appears in your town. His name is Elias, and he was always the loud one, the kid who dared you to steal apples and climb too high trees. You hadn't seen him since 1940. Turns out he'd been in the East all this time, teaching school under Soviet supervision, but now he's out. Fled under cover of night with forged documents and nothing but a suitcase. You buy him a beer at the tavern. He tells you stories you barely believe, about collective farms, political officers sitting in the back of classrooms, neighbours disappearing for saying the wrong thing. He shakes his head and says, "It's not Nazism," but it rhymes. The line between East and West isn't just geography anymore, it's identity. It's whether you believe in the world you're living in, or the one you're trying to forget. There's a debate, of course. Intellectuals arguing in university halls and dusty salons. Is West Germany just a softer version of the same machine? Is East Germany a noble socialist experiment or just a grey prison with a red flag? You're not a scholar. But you do know this. When a country splits in half, so do its memories. You meet a man at a market who insists the Americans are just as bad as the Soviets, says democracy is a show, and the real power still hides behind uniforms, just with different badges. You ask him what he wants instead. Neutrality, he says. Real peace. But when you press him, he changes the subject. You start to dream again. The war is less present now, but your dreams are filled with lines. White paint, barbed wire, fences with no gates. You wake sweating, heart racing, like you've just escaped from something you didn't even realise you were in. And always, in the distance, you see faces you recognise. Faces of men who stayed behind, who made their peace with the New East. You wonder if they dream of you too. There's a fringe belief you come across in an old magazine, that Germany will reunite, that the wall, metaphorical for now but real in the hearts of many, won't stand forever. That one day, people will walk freely between Berlin's halves like nothing ever happened. You fold the magazine and shake your head. The article is dated 1949. You can't help but smile at the optimism. Sweet. Delusional. But sweet. In the evenings, Lotte sits by the radio and knits. You sit beside her, fixing a broken hinge on the cellar door. A broadcast crackles through about another border tightening, another checkpoint closing, more disappearances. Feels like the war didn't end, she says quietly. It just changed uniforms. You look out the window at the quiet street. No tanks, no smoke, just a cat sitting on a wall and the wind nudging a laundry line. Maybe peace isn't quiet, you say. Maybe it just whispers. And the whisper, in this part of the world, is always laced with barbed wire. You start walking. Not for exercise, not for pleasure, just to move. Something about the rhythm of your boots on gravel makes your thoughts easier to carry. Most days, after the bakery closes and Lotte finishes counting coins at the counter, you throw on your coat, light a cigarette, and head toward the edge of town. No real destination, just distance, space, air. It's on one of these walks in late autumn that the idea of going back hits you. Not home, not westward, but back. Back to where it all fell apart. To the places you walked as a soldier. The ones that haunted your sleep and never fully explained themselves. The names that stuck in your chest like splinters. Kiev, Smolensk, Kharkiv. You don't say anything to Lotte right away. She'd worry. Maybe she'd laugh. Maybe she'd just stare, unsure if it's guilt, grief, or something worse. But the thought doesn't go away. Instead it festers, turns into a plan, and by spring you're on the road. You're not entirely alone in this. A small handful of men, fellow former soldiers, quiet types with distant eyes, are doing the same. Some are looking for graves, others for forgiveness. A few, you suspect, are chasing the ghosts of who they used to be, hoping to shake hands and say goodbye. Your route cuts east, zigzagging through small towns and border stations. The Cold War has made everything more complicated, more suspicious. You carry papers, you carry letters of recommendation, you carry yourself like a man who has nothing left to hide. The guards wave you through eventually, usually with a shrug that says, "You're not important enough to stop." Your first major stop is in what's now East Germany. The signs are written in the same language, but something about them feels hollow. State slogans hang from buildings like wet laundry. People look over their shoulders before answering simple questions. You spend one night in a room above a pub, listening to a man rant in half-whispers about the party. "They don't shoot you," he says. "They just make sure no one remembers you were ever here." You keep moving. Then comes Poland. You cross the border with a forged letter from a friend of a friend, claiming you're searching for a fallen cousin. It's not completely false. You did lose people here. You just never knew their names. The towns are smaller now, the roads rougher, but the hospitality is surprising. Suspicious at first, then warm in its own guarded way. People feed you boiled potatoes, offer you beer. One old man asks if you were a soldier. You nod. He nods too. "We were all soldiers," he says. You find the remains of a trench near a grove of trees outside a village whose name you can't pronounce. The trees have grown back, stubborn and tall, but the earth still remembers. You kneel and press your hand to the soil. It's cold, damp, and quiet. Too quiet. Here's the thing about retracing your steps after a war. It never takes you back to the place you left. Everything's shifted, rebuilt or abandoned, painted over, paved through, turned into parks or ruins depending on which side won. The town where you once saw a woman hang from a lamppost, public punishment, wrong loyalty, is now a market square. Children run across the spot where you watched her body sway in the wind. You sit on a bench and try not to cry. You don't stay long in any one place, just enough to confirm it still exists, or that it doesn't. You walk, you ride buses, you trade chores for warm beds and crusts of bread. Somewhere outside Minsk you meet a Belarusian farmer who gives you directions to an old battlefield, now overgrown with weeds and silence. You stand on that field alone one morning, fog rising like smoke, and you remember how the world sounded when the mortars hit. How the sky didn't look big enough to hold all the screaming. You feel your knees give way. You sit in the grass, head in your hands, and let it wash over you. Not as a soldier, not as a German, but just as a man. A man who once walked this land with a rifle and a ration pack, convinced he was part of something bigger than himself. And now, 20 years later, you can't even find the names of the dead. There's a strange comfort in how little remains, as if the land itself has decided not to hold a grudge. Or maybe it just doesn't care. That's worse somehow. You start back slowly, taking a southern route this time, through Hungary, Austria, and eventually into Bavaria. The trains are faster now, sleeker. New windows looking out on old scars. The border guards are younger than the war itself. One of them examines your passport and says, "You've come a long way." You nod. Longer than you know. When you finally return to Lotta, she doesn't say, "I told you so," or "Are you mad?" She just holds you for a long time in the doorway, smelling of flour and soap, and says, "Did it help?" You don't answer right away. "Some of it," you say eventually, "not all." In the days that follow, you unpack slowly, physically and emotionally. You hang a photo from a roadside memorial above your desk. You keep a small tin of earth from the trench grove on your shelf. You make tea in the mornings and find yourself humming the melody of a lullaby you overheard from a window in Kiev. Lotta watches you closely those first few weeks. She doesn't press. She just keeps leaving an extra cup of coffee on the table every morning, just in case you need to talk. One night, sitting by the window, you finally do. You tell her about the girl with the white scarf who stared at you as you passed her burning village, about the Russian soldier who spared your life and vanished into the fog, about the boy you watched die in the snow, calling for a mother who would never hear him. She doesn't cry. She just puts her hand over yours and says, "They would have remembered you." And for the first time, you let yourself believe that maybe, just maybe, you deserve to be remembered too. You return from your long walk east with blisters on your feet, dirt on your soul, and a quiet heaviness that settles behind your ribs like a permanent tenant. Life doesn't stop while you're gone. Back in town, things have shifted. The bakery still stands, sure, and Lotta still greets you with that same wry smile, but the details are different. Subtle, like someone rearranged the furniture in your memory. A new lamp in the corner, a younger delivery boy with a limp, a new couple living in the house across the street where the windows used to be boarded up. And yet, there's something more unsettling than change. It's the way people look at you when they realise you've returned from out there, east of the border, past the line, past the place where nice people don't go anymore. They don't say anything unkind, not exactly. But the questions start. Casual, clipped, careful. Why would you go back there? Did you find what you were looking for? And more often than you'd like, the quiet muttered, "What kind of man wants to see that place again?" You learn quickly that there are two kinds of people now. Those who want to forget the war ever happened, and those who want to reshape the story into something cleaner. The first kind avoids you. The second invites you to meetings. One of them corners you outside the bakery. He's well-dressed, clean-shaven, smells like new paper and ambition. Says he's part of a local veterans integration group. Wants to know if you'd be interested in speaking. Telling your story. Sharing your experiences with the younger generation so they don't repeat the mistakes of the past. You ask what he means by that, and he smiles just wide enough to make you uneasy. Redemption, he says. People want to hear about redemption. You nod and tell him you'll think about it. You don't. Because here's the thing. You're not sure you've earned redemption. You've earned survival. You've earned quiet. But redemption. That sounds too clean. Too heroic. You weren't a monster, but you weren't a saviour either. You were just a man with muddy boots, shaking hands, and a head full of orders. You notice the tension growing around you. Not from the people who knew you best. They've seen your labour, your loyalty, your scars. But from those who didn't live through it. The younger ones. The ones with new textbooks and strong opinions. They don't see a man who built bridges and buried the past with his bare hands. They see the uniform you don't wear anymore. One afternoon, a new law is proposed in town. Nothing big, just a rule about banning old military insignias from public events. It's a fair move, symbolic. But it sparks a conversation that creeps like smoke under every door. What else should be banned? What else should be erased? What's allowed to be remembered, and by whom? At a town hall meeting, a teenager stands up and asks if any former soldiers should be allowed to speak at all. "Why should we listen to men who stood by and did nothing?" he says, his voice sharp as a blade. No one answers him, but all the eyes in the room turn toward you. You don't speak. You just stand, tip your hat, and leave. Later over dinner, Lotta tells you not to let it get to you. They didn't live it, she says. They only read about it. It's easier to blame a name than to understand a man. You nod, but her words don't settle, because somewhere deep inside you understand the boy's anger. You even admire it. You just wish he'd asked questions before swinging the hammer. There's an older woman in town, Frau Engel, who used to live next to your parents before the war. You find her one day sitting on a bench near the old market square, feeding breadcrumbs to birds that never seem full. You sit beside her, mostly for the quiet. She looks at you and says, "Do they think we liked it?" You're not sure what to say. "Do they think we woke up one day and chose that madness?" she continues, her voice cracked but steady. "That we wanted the uniforms, the hunger, the fear. We just kept our heads down. And when we looked up, the sky was on fire." You sit in silence for a while. Then she hands you a scrap of paper. On it is a list of names, men from your town who never returned. Some were soldiers, some were resistance, some were just people who asked the wrong questions at the wrong time. "Write down anything you know," she says, "before it's too late." You start with the ones you remember. Zimmer, Ebert, young Fritz who used to deliver milk and once punched a soldier for yelling at his sister. You remember the last time you saw him, being dragged into a truck with no markings. You never told anyone that before. By the end of the week the list is longer. Some names are just fragments. First names, nicknames, street descriptions. You give it to Frau Engel. She places it in a box with hundreds of others. Says they're trying to build a memorial, not for heroes, just for the forgotten. And it's there, standing in her cramped living room beside stacks of boxes, that you realise something quietly important. Remembrance is a kind of resistance. A small, defiant way of saying, we were here, we mattered, even if we got it wrong. The next week you return to the bakery after a delivery and find Lotta cleaning the front windows. She's humming. There's sunlight on her shoulders, and for a moment, everything feels not normal, but okay. Like the ground under your feet is finally stable. You walk to the counter, set down the basket, and say, "I think I might speak after all." She doesn't ask what changed your mind. She just hands you a clean apron, kisses your cheek, and says, Make sure you tell them the truth. And you will, not because it absolves you, not because it makes anything whole, but because it's yours. And it happened. And the least you can do is not let the silence finish the story. The air in town starts to shift around the mid-1950s. Not the weather, but something subtler, heavier, full of static like a radio just barely tuned out of place. There's a new rhythm now. Trains run on time again. New shops open with bright signs. Children laugh in the schoolyard without flinching at passing trucks. And factories, real factories, start roaring back to life, spitting out goods and smoke like they've been waiting for years to breathe again. They're calling it the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. At first the phrase sounds like a joke. Miracle? Nothing about post-war life has felt miraculous so far. You've eaten stale bread for breakfast more times than you can count. Your boots still leak if you step in puddles, and half the light bulbs in your house flicker like haunted teeth. But slowly, undeniably, things begin to change. You notice it in your neighbours' coats. Thicker, newer. In the bread, fresher, warmer. In the bakery's till at the end of the day, not heavy, but heavier. There's money moving again, and it's not just being hoarded in vaults or passed between black market traders, it's flowing. You're not rich, not by any measure, but for the first time in years, you don't have to count every coin before buying a pair of shoelaces. One day, Lotta comes home with a radio. Not borrowed, not found, not scrounged, but bought. You laugh so hard you nearly drop a tray of pretzels. The government is giving loans too. Not just to the big fish in Berlin or Frankfurt, but to regular people. Carpenters, grocers, even bakers. You and Lotta are offered a small one to expand the bakery's kitchen. The paperwork is a maze, but it goes through. A few months later, you've got a new oven that doesn't scream like a wounded animal every time it hits 200 degrees. This is what peace looks like, you think. Not parades or anthems or marble statues. Just warm bread, working radios, the quiet hum of a future being pieced together from leftover parts. And yet, you don't quite trust it. You've seen miracles before, short-lived ones. You've seen men believe in golden promises only to be buried under rubble a year later. The scars across your arms, your back, your dreams, those don't vanish just because someone invented canned soup and affordable bicycles. You carry them like old receipts, folded, faded, but impossible to throw away. One afternoon you're walking through town and see a line of people outside a newly built department store. A real one with glass windows and everything. You watch as a boy holds his father's hand and presses his nose to the display. A toy train running in circles. "Papa, can we get one?" The man laughs. "Maybe next Christmas." You feel something strange in your throat. Not envy, not quite sadness. Just displacement. Like the world moved ahead and forgot to send you the memo. You spent your prime learning to dig trenches and ration hardtack. Now everyone around you is figuring out how to live again while you're still carrying a war in your bloodstream. There's an old man at the bakery who comes in every Thursday. He orders the same thing. 2 rolls, no butter. He fought in the First World War and wears a coat that still smells faintly of coal and regret. One day he says, "You know, this isn't the first miracle I've seen, but it's the first one I believe in." You ask why. Because this one didn't come from speeches, it came from work. He taps his cane on the floor twice and leaves. You keep thinking about that, because he's not wrong. The recovery wasn't a gift. It was shoveled, nailed, carried in bruised hands by people like you who didn't ask for applause. You patched roofs, mixed mortar, baked bread, stacked crates, hauled bricks. You didn't rebuild a Reich, you rebuilt a country. And there's a difference. Here's a fun fact. Quirky even if it weren't so heavy. In the years following the economic miracle, many Germans developed a strange relationship with nostalgia. Not for the war, but for the certainty it once offered. Not because they missed Hitler or uniforms, but because the world, even while burning, made a kind of cruel sense. Now things are better, but they're also messier. More voices, more choices, more room to screw things up, and that scares some people. You see it in little ways. A man who grumbles that too many foreign workers are showing up in the factories. A woman who insists the old order had discipline. A young man who never served, never fought, never starved, who asks loudly if maybe things were simpler before. You almost slap him. You don't. You just walk away. Because here's the trap. When survival becomes comfort, memory becomes selective. The miracle isn't that Germany's thriving again. It's that people think they did it alone. that the war can be folded up like a bad chapter in a book and tucked away behind the booming economy, the new cars, the televisions, flashing smiling faces in black and white. But not you, you remember. You remember rebuilding a school with hands still shaking from a mine collapse. You remember carrying a sack of cement past a cemetery where none of the graves had names. You remember the bridges, the barbed wire, the train stations where no one ever came home. Lotta keeps a box in the back of the bakery. In it she collects notes from travellers, people passing through town, stopping in for bread and warmth. One day, you open the box and read a note from a man who says, "This place reminds me that the world didn't end. It just kept going." You keep that one. You hang it on the bakery wall, framed in wood you sanded yourself. Not to boast, not to inspire, just to remember. Because the miracle isn't just the money. It isn't the ovens or the trains or the coats with real wool linings. The miracle is you, still here, still standing, still human, and maybe, just maybe, learning how to live. It starts with a handshake. You're helping a neighbour repair the fence along the north field. Something mundane, something blessedly normal. When a man in a dark coat and polished shoes appears near the road, leaning against a car that looks far too new for this part of town, he calls your name, not hesitantly but with confidence, like someone who's already checked your background, your work history, and maybe even what kind of jam you like on your toast. You straighten, wipe your hands on your trousers and nod. He introduces himself as Müller, which you're immediately sure isn't his real name, and asks if you'd be willing to have a conversation, over coffee, somewhere private. He gestures to the bakery with a polite smile. You glance toward your house, toward Lotta, who's just stepped out to shake crumbs off the tablecloth, then back at him. You've seen this dance before. Not this exact version, but close enough to recognise the music. You agree. He buys you coffee in a small cafe near the train station. The waitress doesn't make eye contact. Müller places a thin folder on the table, unopened, and begins the pitch. "We're building something," he says. "A defence structure. West German, NATO aligned. The Soviets are consolidating and we can't afford to fall behind." You sip your coffee. It's good. Bitter. Müller leans in. "Men with your experience are valuable. You understand logistics, terrain, silence. You understand what's required. You don't say anything at first, not because you're shocked. After all, you've heard the rumours about ex-soldiers working for the new government, about American agents recruiting former Wehrmacht men for intelligence work, about backroom deals where war criminals turn into Cold War consultants if their skills are sharp enough and their files muddy enough. You'd hoped it was exaggeration. Apparently not. He doesn't say the letters CIA, but you feel them sitting heavily between every sentence. He does mention intelligence, network building, and internal stability. All very sanitized, all very plausible, and all exactly what you don't want anything to do with. He offers you a number, not just a figure but a salary, a living wage steady with housing and travel allowances. He tells you you'd be serving your country again, this time for democracy. That word tastes different now. You decline, politely but firmly. You tell him you've had your fill of uniforms and secrets. You've built enough bridges, buried enough names. You bake bread now. He smiles again, not insulted, not surprised. He taps the folder once, leaves it unopened and slides it across the table. "Should you change your mind," he says, "you'll know how to reach us." Then he's gone. Just like that. The chair still warm, the folder sitting there like an accusation. You don't open it. Not right away. When you finally do, late that night in your shed with the door bolted and the lights off, you find your military record, your name, your units, deployment dates, even the Soviet camps. There are notes in English, a few in Russian, a list of names you don't recognize, some underlined. They've been watching you. You burn the folder in the wood stove. Not all at once, page by page, slowly, watching the flames eat up who you were. Lotta doesn't ask. She just stands behind you, arms crossed, gaze steady. "You're not going, are you?" she says. You shake your head. "No," you say. "I already played that game. I know how it ends." But here's the thing. The recruitment never really stops. Maybe not from Müller, but from the world around you. The Cold War creeps into everything. A whisper at the pub, a strange question from a stranger on a train, a friend of a friend who works in security and thinks you'd be useful. They're all fishing in the same pool, and your name keeps floating to the surface. Sometimes the jobs are less sinister. Surveillance, translation, border patrol, just a pair of eyes and ears on the ground. Other times, they're darker. You hear about former SS officers working for American intelligence, feeding them information about Soviet infrastructure. You hear about informants turning in their neighbours for a new pair of shoes and a stack of crisp bills. And worst of all, you hear about Soviets doing the same thing in reverse, turning German POWs into spies, blackmailing them with family, with secrets, with shame. You wonder how many of the men you left behind in the East returned home wearing different allegiances under their skin. There's a saying that keeps floating around, Der Krieg ist vorbei, aber der Kampf geht weiter. The war is over, but the fight goes on. It's not about trenches anymore, it's about loyalties. And you've already lived through a time when loyalty cost people everything. You make your decisions slowly over months. You decide not to fight. Not like that. You'll be loyal to your family, your village, your bakery, not to men in coats with folders full of your sins. But the folder's ghost lingers. It shows up in dreams sometimes. Muller's voice, soft and persuasive. You know what's required? Yes, you do. That's exactly why you said no. Here's something history books don't always explain. The post-war intelligence game wasn't clean. It wasn't heroes versus villains. It was vultures fighting over the bones of a broken continent, and sometimes the ones feeding them looked like your neighbours. There's a fringe theory that keeps popping up in the margins, one you overhear in taverns and read in the footnotes of banned books. That the Cold War was won not by armies, but by ghosts. Ghosts of the Wehrmacht, ghosts of the SS, ghosts with new names and tailored suits, feeding secrets into machines that chewed up morality and spat out policy. You don't know if it's true, but you know it's not completely false. The irony doesn't escape you. You fought a war that ended in ruin. Then you spent a decade rebuilding, and now, the very hands that helped break everything are being asked to protect it. You go back to your bakery, to Lotte, to early mornings and flour on your elbows. You listen to the radio and try not to hear the static behind the songs. You write your name on receipts, not reports. And when someone asks what you did during the war, you tell them the truth. At least most of it. Because that's your resistance now, not silence, not obedience, clarity and bread. Still warm, still rising, even when the world around you doesn't know what to believe in anymore. They give you another uniform, not brown, not black, not even the dull grey of your prisoner days. This one is blue, with clean lines and a neat little patch on the shoulder that says Bundeswehr. The new German army. Same soil, same language, same rifles, but a different country now. That's the idea anyway. You don't sign up, but others do. Men you used to march beside, drink beside, bury comrades beside. Some of them are in it for the pay, some for the structure. A few, unbelievably, for the pride. They say it's different this time. We're part of NATO now, they say. We're defending freedom. You nod. Because what else can you do? You're not here to argue. You've already worn too many lies as badges. Still, it's strange watching them return to service. Some get promotions, others start at the bottom again, pretending they didn't once storm through Poland or huddle in ditches outside Moscow. The Bundeswehr doesn't ask too many questions if your record is clean enough. Continuity with caution, they call it. Translation: we need soldiers who know how to shoot without needing a pep talk. You see them around town sometimes, especially when a new base opens nearby. The uniforms are crisp, the smiles carefully measured. They walk differently, like men still waiting for someone to shout Achtung behind them. One of them, a former lieutenant from your old unit, waves to you in the bakery like nothing ever happened. He's clean-shaven now, teaching marksmanship at the academy. Defense, he tells you proudly. Nothing like the old days. You believe him, mostly. The Bundeswehr becomes a point of debate, just like everything else in West Germany. Some say it's necessary, part of being a sovereign nation again. Others call it a betrayal, a slow return to something no one wants to name out loud. You stand somewhere in the middle, a familiar position by now. You don't hate it. You just don't trust it. But the military isn't the only place you start seeing old faces. Some of your former comrades don't go back to uniforms. They go into private work, security firms, warehouses, border patrol. You meet one who guards a shipping yard near Hamburg. Another drives armoured trucks full of payrolls for construction sites. They joke about it. Call themselves defenders of the Deutschmark. But the way they watch people, still scanning for danger, for threats that don't exist anymore, it doesn't look like a joke. You hear whispers that some were quietly offered jobs by American or British agencies during the Cold War build-up. Surveillance mostly, counterintelligence, watching communists, tracking radicals, keeping tabs on who's talking to whom in all the wrong cafes. Some said yes, some said no. All of them said nothing. And then there are the ones who disappeared again. Not into Argentina this time, but into paper jobs, bureaucracies, administration. A few ended up in city councils, police departments, even courtrooms. Germany needed to fill seats, and there was no time to ask too many questions about where someone had sat in 1942. There's a joke that goes around. The only difference between the old guard and the new one is the sewing on their jackets. You hear it in a bar one night and don't laugh. Not because it isn't funny, but because you can't tell if it's supposed to be. Here's a historical footnote they don't always advertise. Nearly half of the Bundeswehr's early officers had served in the Wehrmacht. Some had been prisoners, some had led divisions. They brought discipline, efficiency, and a very quiet kind of amnesia. Trials had ended. The big fish were gone. But the smaller ones had slipped into different ponds. You try not to dwell on it. You spend your days at the bakery, your nights in the shed, tinkering with radios and writing letters to no one in particular. Lotte keeps the books balanced, hums while she works, and reminds you not to overthink everything. The country's still breathing, she says. That's something. And she's right. West Germany is growing, loudly, quickly. There are new roads, new schools, new record players in every other window. The Americans have their boots on the ground, but their dollars in your pockets. And if you squint, it almost looks like a future. But the past is never far. One afternoon, a young man walks into the bakery with a bright face and a crisp Bundeswehr brochure in his hand. He's 18, polite, curious. "You fought, right?" he asks. You glance up from the register. "My grandfather says the old soldiers know what honour means." You think for a moment. "I fought," you say slowly. "But I don't know what honour had to do with it." The boy frowns. "But the Bundeswehr is different. We're the good guys now." You hand him his change. "Maybe," you say. "Just make sure you know why you're wearing the uniform before someone tells you." He thanks you, leaves, and you watch him disappear into the afternoon light. Later, Lotte asks what he wanted. "Reassurance," you say. "I think he was hoping I'd bless the path." You didn't. Because that's not your job anymore. You're not a symbol. You're not a cautionary tale. You're just a man who spent too many years trying to scrub a stain out of history with his bare hands. That night, you sit with your old army jacket. It's been buried in a trunk under the bed, wrapped in cloth and shame. You take it out, look it over, the stitching still strong, the name patch still legible. You consider burning it, then consider keeping it. You do neither. You fold it again and put it back in the dark, exactly where it belongs. Because some things shouldn't be erased. They should just stay silent. The past always knocks when you least expect it. Sometimes gently, sometimes like a hammer to the ribs. You're stacking crates of flour behind the bakery when it happens. A newspaper flutters open on the counter, a headline catching your eye. Testimony. Unsealed. Massacre in Eastern Village. Attributed to Wehrmacht unit. The words are familiar. Too familiar. The location. A place you passed through in 1943. The unit? Not yours directly, but close. Adjacent. You shared rations, stories, sometimes even orders. You wipe your hands on your apron and stare at the page. The details come slow. It's not new. Just newly public. Survivors who finally spoke. Records uncovered from Soviet archives. Names that were redacted for years, now printed in black ink for anyone to see. One of them you recognise. Not a friend. More of a shadow. A man you stood beside once in a field where the smoke from burning houses curled around your ankles like snakes. The article quotes him. Cold. Clinical. "Following orders," he says. You taste bile. That phrase, just following orders, is a kind of virus. It infected a whole generation of men, including you. Back then it made sense. Orders kept you alive. Orders gave shape to the chaos. Orders were what separated you from the men crying out in languages you didn't understand. Now, it feels like the oldest lie in the book, a dull blade wrapped in justification. That evening you sit at the table with the paper spread before you. Lotte watches you from the sink, drying dishes slowly. "Did you know him?" she asks, though her tone says she already suspects the answer. You nod. "We shared a trench and a stew pot. He told terrible jokes." She doesn't ask the next question. You're grateful. But it hangs there anyway. What did you do? You didn't pull the trigger. You didn't light the fire. But you knew. Maybe not the full extent, but enough. Enough to look away. Enough to tell yourself that if you kept walking, you wouldn't have to see the smoke. that the screaming wasn't your problem, that someone else, somewhere higher up, would carry the guilt like a medal. The truth is, you've been carrying it ever since, just tucked in deeper pockets. That's the unspoken burden of surviving. Eventually you run out of excuses and only memory remains. The article sparks debate across town. Some want justice. Others say there's no point, too much time has passed. He's an old man now. Sick, reportedly. Shouldn't he be left in peace? They say it like peace is something he's earned. You attend a public forum about the revelations. A young woman stands and reads the names of the dead. Names gathered from testimonies, from graves, from village records half burned in the chaos. Her voice doesn't shake. Yours does. A man from the audience, clean-shaven, serious, probably born after the war ended, asks a question that lands like a stone in a quiet pond. How did no one stop it? No one answers. Because there's no answer that makes sense. Not one that fits inside a headline or a textbook. Not one that makes it all clean. You walk home slowly that night, replaying the march through that village. The way your boots slipped in the slush. The way one of the officers laughed too loudly. The smell. Wood smoke and something worse. The silence afterward, which was somehow louder than the gunfire. When you get home, Lotta is waiting at the table. She's laid out 2 cups of tea, though neither of you touch them. You speak first. I knew. She doesn't flinch. She's known this too, in her own way. I didn't do anything, you say. I could have said something. Or, I don't know. Thrown down my rifle. Something. She puts her hand over yours. And what would that have changed? Maybe nothing, you say. But maybe I'd sleep better. There's debate, of course. The academics have been arguing for years. Was the Wehrmacht complicit? Were these isolated cases or symptoms of something deeper? Some say only the SS bore guilt. Others insist there were no clean hands. The truth, as always, is in the blood between the lines. You receive a letter a few weeks later, from a university. A professor compiling oral histories from veterans. He's polite, earnest. He says your name came up from a list of known returnees in your region. He'd like to interview you. Not for prosecution, he assures you. For remembrance. Lotta encourages you. Maybe it's time, she says. You write back. Not yes, not no. Just, let me think about it. And you do, for days. You visit the cemetery in town, walk past rows of small white markers, soldiers, civilians, names carved into stone like confessions. One of the headstones belongs to a boy you used to know. He died in 42. They said it was an accident. You always suspected it was something darker. You sit on the bench beneath the trees and close your eyes. You think about the smell of gun oil and wet wool, about the sound of boots on frozen earth, about the girl in the village who looked at you, wide-eyed, with a child on her hip and didn't run. She didn't scream, didn't beg, just watched, and you kept walking. When you open your eyes, it's dusk. The town is quiet. The church bell rings 6 times. You go home, you sit at your desk, you open a fresh sheet of paper. You begin with the words, I was there. You don't tell everything. Not yet, but you tell enough. It's not redemption, it's not justice, it's just the truth. And maybe finally that's a start. You start waking in the middle of the night again. It's been years, long, blessed years, since the last time you bolted upright in the dark, chest heaving, hands clenched around invisible rifle straps. But now, like a record skipping back to the same broken groove, the dreams return. Not every night, not even most, but often enough to make sleep a gamble. It's never the gunfire that wakes you, never the shouting, the frost, or the thunder of artillery. It's quieter than that. Always the same scene, a forest, ankle-deep snow, and the sound of your own breathing as you walk through what used to be a village. No bodies, no fire, just silence. The kind that scratches behind your ears like a guilty thought. Lotta hears you before you even sit up. She turns in bed, still mostly asleep, and places her hand on your arm. It's not real, she murmurs. I know, you whisper, but it was. PTSD wasn't a term when you came back. It was just called being nervous, or worn down. If you flinched at loud noises, you were touchy. If you drank too much, you were weak. If you refused to talk about the war, you were either hiding something or just plain broken. No one talked about the dreams. You did once, years ago, to another ex-soldier in a train station waiting room. He laughed and said, I still wake up trying to clean my rifle. Half the time my wife finds me muttering about cartridges in my sleep. You both laughed, but you could tell it wasn't funny. Not really. Back then you thought the nightmares would fade. Time would dull them. You told yourself that the bakery would drown the memories in flour and fire, that love and coffee and quiet mornings would finally overwrite the hell in your head. And for a while they did. But now the war has become history, for everyone except the ones who lived it. The country has moved on. There are televisions now, advertising jingles, girls with skirts above the knee, boys with Elvis haircuts and no idea what a foxhole smells like. And you've become a relic, a story half told, something schoolchildren read about in stiff paragraphs and forget after the quiz. You try not to resent it. Most days you succeed, but the dreams keep coming. You talk to a doctor finally after waking one morning with sweat-soaked sheets and a pillowcase clenched in both fists. He's younger than your war medals, listens quietly, doesn't flinch when you talk about the girl in the village, or the man with his legs frozen into a trench, or the sound of a horse dying slower than a man ever should. He calls it trauma, not weakness, not shame, just something that needs time and space. He gives you exercises, breathing, reframing. He says writing helps, so you start keeping a notebook by the bed. Short phrases, colours, smells, the shape of hands. One entry reads simply, "Her eyes didn't blink." Another, "I kept walking." You share some of it with Lotta, not all. She has her own ghosts, even if she won't name them. She holds your hand when you can't finish a sentence. She makes you tea when your voice cracks. Sometimes she just sits with you, shoulder to shoulder in the early morning quiet while the oven warms and the world hasn't quite woken up yet. There's a theory you heard once from a French POW who worked alongside you, rebuilding a rail line in 1946. He said, "The war doesn't end when the last bullet is fired. It ends when the last man stops remembering." You think about that often. You go to a veterans gathering one spring. Just a small one. Men from the area, most of them greyer, quieter, some limping more than before. You recognise a few faces. Others you only half remember. You swap stories, mostly harmless ones. The cold, the food, the boredom. You avoid the rest. But then someone brings up the nightmares. "Still dream of the snow," one man says, eyes on his beer. Another nods. "I still feel the cold in my knees." They talk openly now, not proudly, not brokenly, just honestly. The way men do when they're too tired to pretend anymore. One man, older than the rest, says, "I used to think I was being punished. But now I think the memories are just the receipt. We bought our lives with the lives of others. That's the price. This is the reminder." No one argues. Afterward you walk home slower than usual. The streets are empty, the moon hangs low, and for once, you don't feel ashamed. You don't feel proud either. You just feel real. As if everything you've lived, every horror, every silence, every scar, isn't something to hide but something that happened. And that matters. Here's something you learn in your 50s. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't even mean forgiving. It means naming, saying what happened out loud to someone who listens, and sometimes that someone is just you. Lotta finds your notebook one day, not by accident. You left it open on the table. She doesn't say anything at first, just sits beside you and flips through it slowly. "You should publish this," she says softly. You laugh. Who wants to read the half-coherent nightmares of a man who once believed marching east would make him important? "I do," she says. "And so, maybe you will. Maybe your story won't end in silence. Maybe it ends in ink, not to be remembered, but to remember." You find the old photograph in a drawer you rarely open, wedged between tax papers and a rusty tape measure, yellowed at the edges, curling like it's trying to fold in on itself. You almost throw it away. Almost. But your hand stops before it reaches the waste bin. It's not the war that catches your eye, it's her. There's a French girl in the picture. Dark-haired, arms folded, a hint of a smile beneath her narrowed eyes. You remember the exact moment the picture was taken. It was 1945, late summer. The fighting was over, but everything still felt raw, like the war was just sleeping with one eye open. You were stationed outside a village west of Rams, part of a labour unit that existed mostly to sweep up the shattered bones of what your country had broken. And she, Marianne, worked in the bakery, not unlike yours now. It wasn't a love story, not exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. She brought you warm bread on your break. You helped her carry firewood when her uncle threw out his back. The language was broken. Hers was fast and clipped, yours halting and formal. But you understood each other better than you understood the world around you. Sometimes, After work, you'd sit behind the bakery and share the end of the day in silence. Two people who hadn't chosen any of this. You kissed once. You both pretended it didn't happen. Then the orders came. You were moved. She didn't cry. Just pressed the loaf of bread into your hands a little harder than usual and said something in French that sounded like goodbye, but not quite. You never saw her again. And now, decades later, you're sitting in your kitchen, Lotta stirring soup on the stove, and you're holding this little paper ghost of a moment that still hasn't faded the way you thought it would. You don't hide it. You leave it on the table. Lotta doesn't react when she sees it. Just sits across from you and sips her soup. "Who is she?" she asks gently. Not jealous, not angry, just curious. You tell her the truth, about the village, about the bread, about the silence and the kiss. She listens without flinching. "Did you love her?" she asks. You think for a moment. "No," you say. "But I could have, if the world had been different." She nods, takes another sip. "I'm glad it wasn't," she says, and that's it. But the picture stays on the table for the rest of the evening. That night you dream of Marianne for the first time in years. In the dream she's still standing in front of that stone oven, flour dusting her sleeves, and she's smiling, not in sadness, but in gratitude. You wake up not haunted, but softened. The war didn't just leave behind bodies and rubble, it left behind almosts, people you almost became, lives you almost lived, and sometimes remembering those is harder than remembering the violence. A week later you write her a letter you'll never send. You don't even know if she's alive. You wouldn't know where to start looking, but you write anyway. You tell her about your bakery, about Lotta, about your tomato garden. You tell her you hope her hands still smell like dough and that she still folds her arms when she's amused. You tuck the letter into the photo and place both in your desk drawer. Not forgotten, just filed away. That same season your half-brother visits. He's grown taller than you, married now, has a child of his own, a bright-eyed girl with Lotta's laugh and your mother's stubborn chin. You sit in the garden, drinking weak coffee, watching the girl chase a butterfly across the grass. "She wants to know what the war was like," he says suddenly. You nod. "What did you tell her?" "That I don't know," he says. "Only you do." You sigh. She's too young. She'll ask again. You think about what you'd say, about how you'd try to explain that war isn't flags and explosions and glory. It's rot, hunger. It's watching a man bleed into his own boot and realizing you don't feel anything anymore. It's almost falling in love with a woman in a language you barely speak. It's making a home after the world has burned down and planting flowers where you once saw ash. Maybe when she's older you'll tell her some of that. Maybe not. There's a fringe idea you've been circling around in your mind lately. Something you read in a philosophy book you picked up for 10 pfennigs at a flea market. It said that grief, left unspoken, becomes habit. That if you never let your sorrow out, it settles in your joints like arthritis. And maybe that's why your hands ache more these days. Not from kneading dough, not from hauling firewood, but from years of carrying things that never got said. You start to write more letters, not just to Marianne, to old friends, to the dead, to yourself as you were in 1941. You don't send them. You keep them in a box marked Yara. Years. Lotta never opens it. She doesn't have to. She knows. One evening you find her sitting at the kitchen table writing too. You ask what it is. "Just a recipe," she says, smiling. "One I want to remember." And you both understand the weight of that word. Remember. Because love isn't just what you build together. It's what you forgive in each other. The lives you didn't live. The people you once were. The ghosts you still host in the quiet hours. When your granddaughter visits again, she asks if you were scared during the war. You look at her. You think about the village, the bread, the frozen man in the ditch, the fire, the girl with her child on the steps, the love that didn't happen, the life that almost did. "Yes," you say, "but I didn't know it at the time." She nods, too young to understand but wise enough not to ask more. And that somehow is enough. You're not quite old, but your bones have started whispering about the weather before it arrives. Knees that once marched for miles now creak going down the bakery steps. You grunt more than you used to. Lotta calls it your soundtrack. You call it inevitable. Still, the mornings come, and with them, the scent of flour, yeast and coffee so strong it could raise the dead. You're slower now, but you're steady. You always were. The world outside is changing again. Faster this time. Trains are quieter, smoother. Television sets appear in windows like glowing altars. Young people wear strange colours, say stranger things. You open the bakery one morning to find a group of teenagers loitering near the front, laughing in a cloud of cigarette smoke, one of them strumming something that sounds almost like music but not quite. One of them has a jacket with an American flag patch sewn onto the back. He holds the door for you, even says Guten Morgen. You nod, that's all. It's enough. You hear more English these days. American GIs still float around, stationed nearby. Some come in for bread, coffee, a warm smile. One of them calls you sir, despite being twice your size and half your age. You like him. Polite. Earnest. Reminds you of a boy you knew before the war. A farm kid who believed everything had a place, even fear. He didn't make it past 43. It's strange how often you think of the dead now. Not in a grim way, just often. They rise with the morning bread, linger in the steam from the kettle, wait quietly in corners of familiar streets. You nod to them silently. You don't ask them to leave. There's a new mayor in town, young, ambitious, clean-shaven in that way that suggests he's never been tired. He stops by the bakery for photo opportunities, campaigns for more modernisation. He talks about a forward-thinking West Germany, about breaking free from the shadow of the past. He says this with pride, even a bit of heat. You try not to take it personally, but shadows don't just disappear. They stretch, they move, they anchor. One afternoon you sit at a bench outside the bakery while Lotta closes up. Across the street you see a woman adjusting the flower boxes in her window. You recognise her as someone's cousin, or sister, or niece. Maybe, maybe not. She looks at you like she's trying to place your face. Her mouth opens like she's going to ask a question. Then she changes her mind. That happens more often now. People look at you and wonder if you're part of that generation, and when they realise you are, they do the mental math. They ask the unspoken question, were you one of the good ones? You don't have a neat answer. There's a debate happening in the newspapers, again, always, about the old officers, about whether they should still be allowed to hold public office, about whether trials should resume. Some of the names are familiar. A few of them shock you. Men who smiled for the camera, shook hands, kissed babies. Men who gave orders with gloves on. A journalist visits the town asking questions. Young, sharp, typewriter in hand like a weapon. He comes into the bakery, says he's collecting stories from veterans, wants to write a book. You were there, weren't you? He asks, flipping through his notes. Eastern Front? You nod slowly. I was. Did you ever witness war crimes? He says it so plainly, like asking if you prefer rye over wheat. You wipe your hands on a towel. Everyone witnessed something. Not everyone understood it at the time. He tilts his head. But now, you don't answer. Not because you're hiding, but because the answer doesn't fit inside the walls of a bakery. Later you write a letter to the journalist. You don't send it, but you write it. You say, I saw too much, I did too little, I carry it all. And then you fold the paper and slide it into your notebook. You don't need it published, you just need it written. There's an old radio show you and Lotta listen to most evenings. Not the news, never the news, but a call-in program where people tell stories. Stories about lost relatives, lost homes, reunions, recipes, childhoods. Sometimes they cry, sometimes they sing. One man called in to talk about his brother who never came home from Italy and how he still leaves a place for him at the Christmas table. You and Lotta sit in the dark, not speaking, just listening. You'd call in, she says one night, if you thought it would help someone. You smile. I'd call in if I thought they'd believe me. The trouble with memory is that it isn't a photograph. It's smoke. You can trace it, feel its warmth, smell the past as it rises in gentle curls, but you can't hold it, can't pin it down. And when others challenge it, you can't prove anything except that you were there. There's a theory going around, popular with the students, that history should start fresh every generation, that too much remembering makes progress impossible. You understand the impulse, you just fear what forgetting invites back in. One morning you write 3 dates on the blackboard above the bread counter, 1918, 1945, 1955. You don't explain them, you just leave them there. People ask, some nod knowingly, others frown. A young woman says, "What's the last one mean?" You say, "It's the year I forgave myself." Mostly. She doesn't ask more. She buys 2 loaves and leaves with a thoughtful look. Forgiveness is a strange thing. You're not sure who grants it. God? The world? The children of the people you wronged? Or maybe it's not granted at all. Maybe it's grown, like something in the garden, nurtured with sun and time and more patience than you thought you had. In the evening, Lotta hands you a box. It's wrapped in plain brown paper. "What's this?" you ask. "Just open it." Inside, a sweater, warm, hand-knit, your favourite colour. On the tag, she's written, "For winter." The kind we survived before. You press your nose to the wool. It smells like her, like home, like peace, if peace had a texture. You don't say anything, you just hold it, and promise yourself that for all that was taken from you, you'll keep giving. Bread, stories, silence, truth. Because if memory is smoke, then maybe kindness is the fire beneath it. Your hands begin to shake. It's not much at first. Just a slight tremble when you pour coffee, or when you're lacing up your boots and notice the bow ends up crooked. You tell yourself it's nothing. Just age or nerves, or maybe too much time spent kneading dough with stubborn pride. But it persists, stubborn as a stain. You drop a mug one morning. It shatters, and for some reason, the sound feels louder than it should. Lotta notices. Of course she does. She watches you try to frost a pastry one afternoon and gently reaches across the counter, guiding your hand back. "I've got it," she says with a smile. But the smile carries something behind it. Concern wrapped in softness. You nod. Let her take over. You sit in the back room, fingers clenched in your lap, and for the first time in years you feel old. Not tired, not weathered, old. And then the question starts echoing in your mind like a clock ticking. When do you stop? You've never really asked that before. You've always just gone on, one loaf, one nail, one sunrise at a time. But now you catch yourself staring at the flour-dusted floor, wondering what happens if you just stop. The bakery is running fine. Lotta somehow has only gotten sharper with time. She still hums while she works, still keeps the books in a neat ledger, still notices every little thing before you do. You have 2 apprentices now, young men, barely older than boys you once watched bleed out in the mud, now full of jokes and opinions and soft hands that haven't known calluses. You're proud of them, even as they make mistakes, maybe because they make mistakes. One of them, Emile, asks if you ever thought about retiring. You look at him like he's just asked if the sky's optional. Then you realise he doesn't mean it rudely. He just sees you as someone who's done enough. And maybe you have. Lotta brings it up gently. At first it's wrapped in casual talk. "We could take a trip," she says one night, brushing crumbs off the table. "Somewhere warm. Just for a week." You chuckle. "You trying to get me out of the house or out of the country?" "Both," she says, then quieter. "You've carried enough." The word enough hangs in the air for a while. You don't answer right away, but you start thinking about it more often. What life might look like without the early mornings, without the measuring, the mixing, the slow choreography of bread becoming something worth waking up for. And what comes next? Sitting in a chair until you become part of it? You've seen that happen. Men who stopped and then faded, not quickly, just gradually. They forgot how to fill the silence without work. You always promised yourself you'd avoid that. But maybe, just maybe, there's something else waiting. Not the end, just the next. You start by coming in later, letting the boys handle the first batch. You sit and drink your coffee slowly. Lotta joins you sometimes. The bakery still runs, still smells like home. You begin reading again. Books that aren't history, that don't require you to flinch every 10 pages. You even try a novel someone lent you. It has dragons in it. You're confused but charmed. There's a weight that begins to lift gently, as if someone's been slowly untangling the rope you've been hauling behind you all these years. You still have the dreams, but they're softer now. Less blood, more smoke, less screaming, more silence. One night you dream of the trench, but instead of snow, there are sunflowers. You wake up confused, not scared, just surprised. You take a walk to the war memorial near the edge of town. You haven't been in years. It's modest, just a stone column, names etched in careful script. There's a bench nearby. You sit, hands folded, and stare at the names. Some of them were boys you knew. Others, names that once belonged to faces you've forgotten. You whisper each one under your breath like a prayer you didn't know you remembered. Then you say your own name, quietly, just to see how it sounds among the dead. It doesn't echo, but it lingers. You notice someone has left a small carving beside the memorial. It's crude, just a wooden figurine of a soldier, hand-carved, barely detailed. But someone cared enough to leave it. A boy walks by, maybe 10 years old, and stops to stare at it. He asks his father what it means. It means someone remembered, the man says. You smile. At home, you dust off your tools, the real ones, not the bakery utensils, the ones for wood, metal, wire. You find your old box of parts, the ones you used when repairing radios or piecing together things people said were unsalvageable. You start building again, not to forget, but to fill. A clock, a birdhouse, a table leg that's been wobbly for 15 years. The movement of your hands steadies the tremors, not cures them, but calms them. You look at the apprentices and see how they handle the dough. You see the strength in their fingers, the softness in how they talk to customers. One of them hums while he works, the way Lotta does. You catch her smiling at that. One evening, you sit on the back step with a loaf still warm in your lap. You break it open with your hands. No ceremony, no knife. You and Lotta eat in silence, the crust flaking in your fingers. I think, you say, after a long moment, I'm ready. She doesn't ask what you mean. She just nods. You don't leave the bakery, not entirely, but you step back. You let the world keep turning without your shoulder pressed against it. And it does. Just fine. One morning Emil bakes a batch that tastes exactly like yours. You don't tell him. You just smile and ask for a second slice, because that's what peace looks like now. Not applause, not medals, just warm bread you didn't have to make yourself. You never expected your story to outlive you. It begins when a quiet man from the university visits your bakery. He's not flashy. Plain coat, scuffed shoes, a notebook the size of your hand. He introduces himself as a graduate student working on a project about post-war veterans. I heard you're one of the few still around, he says, smiling like that's supposed to be a compliment. You laugh, mostly because the truth of it is too big to hold straight. He wants to hear your story. Not the heroic version, not the polished one, the real one. He's read pieces of it already, he says, from your old testimony, some letters you've donated to the local archive, and a taped interview you'd almost forgotten giving to a historian 10 years ago. The student says there's more to be said. You look at his pen, poised and ready, and say, you know, most of it wasn't worth remembering. He shrugs. Maybe not. But it's worth understanding. You agree to meet him once a week. At first, it's just over coffee. Then slowly he begins to record your words, asking you to go deeper into the parts that still sting. You walk him through your early years, the training, the excitement, the numbness that crept in like frost. You speak of the front, the eastern roads clogged with men and fear. You even speak gently of the things you witnessed and the things you didn't stop. He listens without judgment, only writes when you nod permission. You find it easier to talk now, not because it hurts less, but because you no longer care what anyone thinks of your answers. You're not interested in absolution. You're interested in telling it straight. Some of your old comrades are already gone, buried, vanished, or slowly faded into the anonymity of age. A few of them refused to speak about the war their entire lives. Others tried to revise it, twisting their stories until they were the reluctant heroes in someone else's nightmare. But you stick to the truth, or as close as your memory allows. And one day you tell the student something you've never said out loud before, about the night in Ukraine when your unit received orders that didn't come on paper, just words, spoken through clenched teeth. You remember the officer's voice, his tone. You remember what happened next, what didn't happen, what you saw from the hill. You tell the student, I didn't fire a shot, but I didn't walk away either. He doesn't flinch, just writes. The story spreads slowly, not like gossip, like a rising tide. A journalist reaches out, wants to include you in a radio feature. You hesitate, not because you're afraid, but because you're tired of your past being turned into someone else's idea of drama. I don't want it edited for suspense, you tell him. The journalist says, then we won't, and they don't. You listen to it when it airs, a quiet, respectful piece about war, memory, and the heavy things men carry. You recognize your voice. You barely recognize the man speaking. Afterward, you receive letters, dozens. Some are from students, some from veterans, some from people you'll never meet. One is from a woman in Dresden who writes, my grandfather never spoke about the war. I think now I understand why. Another is from a boy in Stuttgart. You made me realize history isn't just dates, it's people. You sit with these letters at night, spreading them out like cards on the kitchen table. Lotta reads them too, sometimes aloud, sometimes in silence, tears blinking behind her glasses. "Looks like you finally got a fan club," she says, half smiling. You roll your eyes. "Took them long enough. Here's a detail they never teach in school. Survival is quiet. It doesn't parade. It doesn't demand applause. It simply keeps going. You were a soldier once, then a prisoner, then a man with a bakery and a love too strong to be ruined by what you carried. Now you're something else entirely. You're a witness, and there's weight in that. The university invites you to speak. Just once, they say. No pressure. They'll record it, archive it, use it in classes. They promise to treat your words with care. You stand in a lecture hall filled with students who weren't born when Berlin was still divided. You look at their bright faces and feel something like terror. Not of them, of yourself. You begin anyway. You tell them what it was like to be swept up in a movement you didn't fully understand. To feel proud before you felt afraid. To lose your friends. To watch your principles peel away like bark from a dying tree. You tell them that silence is a choice, that following orders isn't the same as being right, that cowardice sometimes looks like obedience, and courage like stepping aside. When you finish, no one claps, not right away. They just sit with it. Then one of the students stands and says, "Thank you." It's not a celebration, it's something better. That night you sit in your garden, a cup of tea in hand. Lotta brings out a blanket and drapes it over your shoulders. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't have to. Because in the distance, a wind chime you built from old shell casings rattles softly in the breeze. Not haunting, not angry, just there. A reminder that even war can be repurposed into something gentle. You look out over your yard, the birdhouse, the sunflowers, the crooked stepping stones your granddaughter laid down with her tiny hands, and you realize the story you've told all these years wasn't just about what happened. It was about what came after, and what still could. The last time you wear your old boots, it's for a funeral. Not yours, though the way your hip complains and your shoulder grinds, you sometimes wonder how far behind you it really is. No, this one's for Victor, your friend, your comrade, your once shadow and occasional light. He's been sick for months, and you knew the call would come eventually. Still, when it does, it hits you like a brick wrapped in paper. It's not just grief. It's history closing another door. You travel to the next town over where he lived the last few decades. Quietly, anonymously, just like you once tried to. The church is modest, whitewashed, a little cracked at the foundation. Fitting. The kind of place where secrets settle into the wood. His daughter greets you at the entrance. She's grown, sturdy, polite. She calls you uncle, though she likely doesn't remember when she first met you. Her hands are calloused like her father's were. Inside, the pews are only half full, mostly older folks, a few younger ones who look a little confused, like they're waiting for a reason to feel something. You take a seat near the back, hat in your hands, knees aching from the cold. The service is simple, a short reading, a hymn, a eulogy from someone who clearly didn't know the full man, only the one Victor let people see. But maybe that's enough. Maybe none of us are ever fully known, even at the end. Maybe we're just impressions, scents, glances, half-finished sentences that other people carry. Afterward you stand at the edge of the grave, hat pressed to your chest, and think about the time Victor gave you half a cigarette when rations were tight, about how he taught you how to patch a boot using only a piece of wire and an old coin, about how he once said, "If we ever get out of this, I'm never following another man again," and he didn't. As the dirt hits the coffin, a gust of wind rattles the trees. You swear you hear him laugh in it. The drive home is quiet. You stare out the window while Lotta steers the old Opel carefully through winding roads, her knuckles pale on the wheel. Neither of you speak until you're nearly back in town. "I'm sorry," she says softly. You nod. He was one of the last who remembered. She glances at you. You still remember. You arrive home to find a small envelope in the mailbox, no return address, just your name in neat script. Inside is a photograph, black and white, grainy, clearly taken from some long-forgotten archive. It's of you, or rather it's of your unit, and you, off to the side, rifle slung, gaze distant. You stare at it for a long time. You don't remember this exact moment, but the feeling it captures, that strange, awful blend of purpose and numbness, is familiar. There's a note inside, typed, brief, for the museum exhibit. We're including it in the section on transition and accountability. Thank you for your voice. You'd almost forgotten. Months ago, the university student had mentioned a travelling exhibit on German soldiers who returned home. Not just the ones who led, but the ones who learned. The ones who carried the war forward in silence until one day they chose to speak. He'd asked for your blessing. You'd said yes, then filed it away behind everything else. Now it's real. You feel something tighten in your chest. Not pride, exactly. Not shame either. Just the deep weight of being included. Of having your existence folded into the record, not scrubbed out of it. You place the photo beside the radio you rebuilt in '49, the one that still hums on certain frequencies when the weather's strange. A quiet reminder that memory isn't always linear. Sometimes it loops back around when you least expect it. Your granddaughter visits the next day. She's taller now, more confident, already talking about studying history in university. She asks if she can interview you, properly this time. Not just family stories, but your real memories, the heavy ones. You hesitate. She says, "I want to understand, not judge." You say yes. She brings a recorder, a little notebook. She asks careful, thoughtful questions. You answer most of them, some with words, some with long silences. At one point she asks, "Do you think people can change?" You look at her, really look, and say, "Only if they want to, and only if someone lets them." That night you light a candle in the kitchen and leave it burning next to the window, not for tradition, not for faith, just for remembrance. Lotta joins you. You don't speak. You just sit, hands intertwined, watching the flame flicker gently against the glass. Here's something they never tell you in history books. Survival isn't just about avoiding death. It's about living with the things you did to avoid it. The choices, the silences, the long, slow crawl back towards something that resembles a soul. You once believed the war ended in 1945. Then you thought it ended in 1955. Then again, in the quiet years when you planted your first tomatoes, when your first apprentice learned to fold the dough just right, when Lotta first said, "I forgive you," without needing to explain what for. Now you know the truth. The war ends a little more every time you choose to tell the truth, and someone chooses to listen. The war ends in pieces, in pauses, in warm bread shared across tables where no one raises their voice, in little girls with notebooks, in candles left burning long after midnight. The war ends when someone remembers you weren't just a soldier. You were a person, still are, and now you're here. Not in a trench, not behind barbed wire, not pushing rubble through frozen streets with blistered hands. You're sitting on your porch, legs stretched out, blanket over your lap, a warm mug between your palms. The sky above you is soft with the lavender hush of early evening, and the birds, those stubborn, noisy little creatures, are still singing like nothing terrible ever happened on this earth. Lotta's inside, humming quietly as she prepares tea. The apprentices, now full bakers in their own right, have locked up the shop for the day, their laughter trailing behind them as they pedal their bikes down the lane. One of them called you the old master this morning. You smirked, rolled your eyes, but something in your chest warmed at the sound. The world has kept going. That was never in doubt. What is surprising, perhaps, is how you've managed to keep going with it. It's been years since you wore a uniform, since the dust of eastern roads clung to your boots, since you stood in a line of men waiting for orders that would etch themselves into the backs of your eyes. And yet, it's all still with you. Not haunting, but resting. Like old tools on a shelf. You still reach for them sometimes, not because you need them, but because they remind you of who you were and who you refuse to stay. You've built a life out of broken pieces, a quiet resistance to what the world once made you. You've loved hard, forgiven slow, and told the truth when it cost you sleep. That's something. Maybe it's everything. As the last light fades behind the hills, you lean back and listen. The wind moves through the trees like a voice you recognize. Not a comrade's, not a ghost's, just the wind, reminding you that you're still here, and you think, you made it. Not in the grand cinematic sense. There are no parades, no medals, no final speeches, just this. Warm tea, quiet love. A bench that creaks beneath you. A past that's no longer chasing you, but walking a few steps behind, respectfully. So you close your eyes, you let it all drift. The memories, the pain, the questions that never got answers. You've done what you could, said what mattered. The rest belongs to time now. When you rest.